This is Atomic Shinobi and today I am going to narrate first part of What If Kid Naruto has full knowledge and power of Minato and Kushina. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share and subscribe to this channel. Now wasting no more time, let's start the story.
On either side of their newborn son, Minato and his spouse Kushina were lying dying. As he repeatedly expressed regret for what he had just done to his cherished new son, Minato lay on the right. Only a few minutes prior, the Kyuubi had escaped his wife's seal and wreaked havoc on the Hidden in the Leaves village. As the village's Hokage, it had been his responsibility to stop the masked man and the Biju king after he broke the seal and attacked the village using the Kyuubi, killing hundreds in the process. The masked man's schemes had been thwarted by Minato, but the Kyuubi were too powerful for him to eliminate. He was therefore compelled to divide the Kyuubi in two, sealing one half for himself and the other half for his newborn son. As he openly wept and caressed his son's hair, which was very similar to his own, Minato remarked feebly, "It's only been a few hours and I suck at being a dad." Kushina, whose baby boy had just been born as the third Jinchuriki to Kyuubi no Yoko, was also crying. She was saddened by the agony and suffering her new son would have to go through due to the cursed demon that was sealed in his stomach, just as it had been in hers. Because she understood what it was like to be looked down upon and despised by everyone for something she didn't want, she sobbed. But Minato was with her son would have nothing, so she found love to fill the void in her heart. He would have no one to fill the void in his heart, and he would be completely alone. Although she knew Minato didn't want this more than she did, she was still somewhat upset with her husband for not coming up with a better solution that would have prevented her little Naru-chan from feeling so alone. She sobbed and spat up blood, saying, "I'm so sorry Naru-chan that we won't get to see you grow up." She turned to face Minato and exclaimed, "Min-kun, what have we done? He's going to be so alone. There won't be anyone to protect our little Naruto?" She had never been this upset in her life. She couldn't believe she was this upset on what should have been the happiest day of her life, even after learning that she would have the Kyuubi sealed inside of her. While stroking his son's hair, Minato appeared devastated. Then, as he shakily started to draw on Naruto's new seal with his life's blood, a glimmer of what could only be hope appeared in his eye. "We may not be able to protect him, but maybe we can help him protect himself." With hope, Kushina asked, "What do you mean?" She would do anything to ensure that her new son was even marginally safer. As he started to explain, Minato slowly drew on Naruto's stomach and said, "We may not be here to protect Naruto, but maybe we can give him the skills to protect himself. The seal I'm drawing will infuse our experiences and talents into Naruto so he can protect himself. So our son will have our memories?" Kushina asked, her brow furrowed in bewilderment, believing that couldn't be good for him. He chuckled lightly, "No, he won't have our memories, but he'll have our experience in battles. He'll have the instincts of two veteran shinobi. He'll fight like we do because of what he will think as instincts, but it will be our experiences that make him have those instincts. He'll be incredibly talented in most ninja art because he'll unknowingly will have years of experience in the fields." Minato went on to explain as he was finishing his seal. Kushina gave her husband a feeble smile, letting Minato take on the seemingly insurmountable task of defending those he loves. She was also a little relieved that they could provide their son with some defense against the harsh, cruel, and mean world. "I wasn't very good at it, but keep up with your studies and practice your ninjutsu hard. Remember that everyone has strengths and weaknesses, so don't get too depressed if you can't do something well. Respect your academy teachers. Naruto. Don't be picky and grow strong. Make sure you bathe every day and stay warm. Also, don't stay up late. You need lots of sleep. And make friends. You don't need a lot of friends." Kushina nodded as she took Minato's hand and put a hand on her son's head. "Oh, and this is crucial. It concerns the 3 shinobi prohibitions. Use caution when lending and borrowing money. Save your mission earnings. Don't drink until you're 20. Moderate drinking can prevent health problems. Women are another restriction. Since I'm a woman, I don't know much about this, but all you need to know is that there are men and women in this world, so it's normal to be attracted to girls. However, avoid becoming dependent on unworthy women. Instead, look for someone like me. In relation to the tree bands, you should be cautious around Jiraiya Sensei. From now on, Naruto, you will experience a great deal of suffering and adversity. Stay loyal to yourself, have a dream, and have the courage to realize it. I wish I had more time to spend with you because I have so much more to share with you." She coughed up blood as she said, "I love you, Minato," she said with an apologetic smile. "I'm sorry I used up your time." Minato simply shook his head and smiled affectionately at her, saying, "Oh, it's okay." He turned to face Naruto and said, "Naruto, my message to you is, I guess the same as your nagging mother's." His wife laughed. "Oh, I want to see him grow up so bad, Kushina began to cry once more. With a knowing smile, Minato said, "We will. I'm going to seal the last of our chakra in the seal as well so we can see Naruto again someday." Kushina nodded that she was prepared and grinned at her husband. Before the seal activated and killed them both, the parents turned to the child between them and said, "We love you, Naruto." Time jump. Naruto at 6 years old, like the rest of his class, Naruto stood in the academy's clearing. They sparred in taijutsu for the first time today, and Naruto knew he wouldn't perform well. From the start, the academy teachers had been undermining his education by teaching him incorrect kunai throwing techniques, incorrect taijutsu stances, incorrect hand gestures, and genjutsu techniques. They were making every effort to prevent him from ever becoming a ninja. He had no idea how screwed he would be if it weren't for his odd instincts. He couldn't explain why he threw a kunai incorrectly when they taught him, but he knew it wasn't right. Naruto changed his stance and grip until it felt natural because it seemed like his body was telling him that he wasn't doing it correctly. He then threw the kunai dead center. He simply disregarded everything the teachers attempted to teach him after that. Naruto wasn't even close to being a fool. He just disregarded their lessons because he knew they would do everything in their power to defraud him. Similar to the kunai incident, he sighed until his hands felt comfortable, and he was able to dispel the genjutsu on them and readily respond to the questions during the test. He had entered the library under a henge and looked for scrolls on different styles of taijutsu, but he was unable to locate any that addressed his own style. The genin and higher sections of the library were locked up, as were all the scrolls that dealt with fighting stances other than the academy style. Being the ninja rank of the section you were attempting to enter was the only way to enter those sections. As a result, Naruto's style was limited to the bits and pieces of academy style he observed in the children who were taught the proper forms. "I'm so screwed," Naruto sighed, scratching his sun-kissed hair. "I might be lucky enough to find a girl. Then, perhaps, I can simply overwhelm her." Naruto considered this carefully. It wasn't particularly sophisticated, to be sure, but for a 6-year-old. Iruka's decision to start the first match between Shikamaru Naru and Choji Akamichi snapped Naruto out of his reverie. Choji grumbled, "But sensei, I don't want to fight my friend. He was a kind person who detested the idea of hurting anyone, much less a friend." "But you're not really fighting your friend Choji. You're helping him get stronger. Remember that even the Hokages spar with their friends to get." Iruka sighed as he described the purpose of the spar. Shikamaru then left the white circle that was the ring, interrupting Iruka's explanation. The Nara said languidly, "Don't worry Choji, I know this isn't your kind of thing." "Thanks Shikamaru." Choji smiled at his friend as Iruka let out a loud sigh. Sakura looked at her friend and said, "Goo, they're both so spineless. You know them?" she asked, and Ino nodded pitifully. "Yeah. Our parents know each other." "Man, Shikamaru will never make it to Chunin. He's too lazy," Kiba said, a little irritated that he had been denied the opportunity to witness a good fight. Shino said, "I don't know Inuzuka-san. Life is very long." Kiba perspired at Shino's sensible tone. "All right," Iruka said, glancing at his two reluctant combatants, but did the harmony symbol. As he walked back and linked fingers with his friend, Shikamaru exclaimed, "Oh, I almost forgot," with a startled expression. Iruka yelled, "Good, now Sasuke Uchiha," as she called out the following competitors. Sasuke's fangirls yelled their support as he entered the ring. Because of his Uchiha status and his superior performance in class, Sasuke was the most well-liked. And Naruto Uzumaki. Everyone glared at the blonde and started muttering derogatory remarks about him, but they were loud enough for Naruto's sensitive ears to hear, so the cheering stopped. "Why is he even trying? He's not going to win. That's the boy my mommy told me to safety away from. What a freak, he should just give up. He's a monster." Despite his intense desire to disprove them all, Naruto knew he was no match for the Uchiha, and he clenched his fists as he entered the ring. "You ready to lose, Dobi?" Sasuke asked haughtily as he assumed his family's taijutsu style interceptor fist stance. Since Naruto lacked a stance and no taijutsu style, he simply sighed and angled his body away from Sasuke. Iruka shouted, "Begin," after glancing at the two competitors. Naruto and Sasuke leapt at one another. Sasuke threw the first blow, hoping to brag by hitting KO once, but the most bizarre thing happened instead. Out of instinct, Naruto grabbed Sasuke's wrist and threw him over his shoulder using his momentum. Sasuke appeared just as shocked as Naruto did when he landed on his feet. He didn't know how he did it. It seemed as though his body knew how to avoid it and his mind wasn't required. Is it similar to hand size and kunai? Perhaps there was a chance he could win after all, he thought hopefully. Naruto squatted down and lunged towards Sasuke, who was startled when Naruto struck him in the stomach. He threw a left hook to strike Naruto in the jaw, ignoring the pain in his stomach, but Naruto stopped the blow by throwing up his forearm and catching Sasuke's arm by the elbow. Based solely on instinct, he struck Sasuke in the mouth as if he were going to harm him. When Sasuke staggered back, he kicked him in the stomach from the front and knocked him out of the ring. Everyone was in awe as Naruto defeated Sasuke. It appeared as though he did it effortlessly. With a slight smile, Iruka said, "Winner, Uzumaki Naruto," with a tone of pride that suggested Naruto had been practicing alone. With an unfathomable sense of joy at his recent victory, Naruto grinned. It was unbelievable to him. Perhaps now everyone woulda. Sasuke's fangirls yelled, "Cheater!" and continued to insult him, each one getting worse than the last. They didn't think Naruto had defeated their Sasuke-kun, and they looked utterly murderous. "I should have known that they wouldn't cheer for me," Naruto thought sadly as he started to run towards the fence and hop over it, crying a little as he did so. He couldn't believe he had lost to the Dobi, and Sasuke was going to make sure he paid for humiliating him in this way. His gaze followed the blonde who had just defeated him. After the academy matches, Naruto spent hours sitting on the Yondaime's stone head. When he was angry about something the village had done to him, this was his favorite spot to go. Naruto had no idea why they detested him so much. They referred to him as a monster and a demon, claimed that he killed their families, and said that he was deserving of the abuse, being ejected from establishments, and receiving scathing looks. He didn't think he was a monster, and he had no idea why they did those things, but that didn't matter. With the exception of his Gigi and Iruka Sensei, the entire village detested him. As the village's Hokage, Gigi took care of Naruto to the best of his ability. He resembled the grandfather he had never known. The only instructor who didn't attempt to ruin Naruto's future was Iruka Sensei, but due to the way the academy was set up, he only taught once a week until his last year. They were the only people who could tolerate his presence. They consistently sidestepped his questions when he asked them why they detested him and why they referred to him as a demon. Sadly angry, Naruto looked down at the village below. Why were they unable to recognize that he was not a monster? That the things they accused him of he never did? Why were they unable to recognize him as a typical 6-year-old boy? Naruto let out a sigh, recalling his earlier battle with Sasuke. He believed that people would begin to respect him more now that he had won. You might even want to play games with him occasionally or become friends with him. Looking back, he saw that he was a fool. He ought to have realized that his peers would never respect him, and now that he had injured the foolish Teme, everyone would despise him even more. He still didn't know how he did it, and it had been quite the shock when he had won. Before his brilliant mind could process what was happening, his body simply knew how to respond. Although he wasn't quite as intelligent as Inara, Naruto was very close, and he couldn't understand how his body knew what to do. He considered telling Gigi about his strange intuition, but he ultimately decided against it. What if the Hokage would begin to stare at Naruto with those ruthless, hateful eyes because that was the last straw? If Gigi gave him that kind of look, Naruto didn't think he could take it. "I won't cry," Naruto said, wiping away a tear that was starting to well up in his eye. "I'm not a whiner." Despite his vow, Naruto kept wiping away the tears that were streaming out of his eyes. Although he didn't express it, Naruto was incredibly lonely. To conceal it, he played practical jokes and pranks, but in reality, Naruto was by himself. He had Gigi and Iruka Sensei, but he couldn't really rely on them because he was afraid that he would make a mistake and they would also hate him. All he wanted was one person in whom he could completely trust and who would not make him feel the icy sting of rejection. Naruto sobbed on top of his idol's head in spite of all of his efforts and promises. "Hey brat." Flashback. 6 hours ago, with a worried look on his face, Hinata watched Naruto leap over the academy fencing. Naruto had appeared extremely agitated that everyone had accused him of cheating. Sakura worriedly asked her crush, "Are you all right, Sasuke-kun? Did that cheater hurt you?" before going to pick him up off the ground. Gruffly, Sasuke slapped her hand away and said, "I'm fine." The question on Sasuke's mind was how he lost to the Dobi. Who was the class loser? He simply knew that when he got home, his father would give him a hard time. As Sasuke picked himself up, Sakura obeyed his commands despite appearing hurt. Iruka, concerned about Naruto, sighed as he observed his retreating form. He appeared deeply offended that everyone had accused him of cheating when it was so clear that Naruto had won using his own abilities. Iruka had been taken aback by Naruto's moves, which were definitely not academy style. He intended to ask Naruto where he got them, but he fled before he could do so. Iruka made the hand size for his signature jutsu after casting a disillusioned glance at his fellow pupils, who were still disparaging Naruto. He applied his big head jutsu and yelled, "Shut up, next contestant." Hinata went to find Naruto after school. She knew she would stutter and pass out if she tried to reassure the blonde that she didn't believe he had cheated. She wanted to try to assist Naruto, though. Unbeknownst to him, Naruto had a significant impact on the life of the young Hyuga. Naruto was everything Hinata wanted to be, and she looked up to him. Self-assured, content, resilient, etc. She would do anything to get her idol's attention, but he never did. She was Naruto's antithesis. She was timid, depressed, racked with self-doubt, and always broke down in tears when she made a mistake. Hinata went up the stairs to the top of the Hokage monument, which is where Naruto usually goes to when he's feeling down or angry. Hinata would sometimes follow Naruto, but our favorite blonde was also unaware of this. She did it in part because she liked being around Naruto and in part because she wanted to know how he handled everyone's hateful glares. When she was upset, his calming presence instantly made her feel better. Hinata saw Naruto sitting on the Yondaime's head, just as she had anticipated. As she watched him, she tried to summon the courage to approach him and strike up a conversation. Hours passed while she struggled to get her body to move, and then she saw something she never would have imagined. Naruto was in tears. Hinata was devastated to see her hero so distraught that she started crying. "I must relocate. I must help Naruto-kun," she thought to herself, and as soon as she started to move toward him, two men materialized out of nowhere. Returning to Naruto, slowly turning around, Naruto saw that the two Chunin ninja who had been conversing with him were actually him. He wiped away any remaining tears and asked, "Yeah. Well, today we heard that you had managed to beat up Sasuke Uchiha in a spar today. Is that true?" inquired the Chunin on the left. After hesitating, Naruto nodded. This guy was giving him the creeps for some reason. With a disarming smile, the two Chunin exchanged sly smiles and said, "In that case we need you to come with us." However, Naruto was completely unimpressed. He had witnessed that type of smile previously, and it had always resulted in his injury. To give them the impression that he was complying, Naruto stood up slowly before acting. He sprang forward, punched the Chunin on the right in the balls, took a kunai out of his holster, threw it at the second Chunin, and turned to flee. As he grabbed Naruto by the hair and yanked him back, the unhurt Chunin exclaimed, "Oh no you don't, you demon!" Naruto screamed in agony as he hit the ground. "You alright?" the Chunin asked, resting his foot heavily on Naruto's chest, as he glanced over at his friend, who was clutching his private area and giving Naruto a pained look. With a quick kick to Naruto's ribs, the wounded Chunin replied, "Yeah, I'll be fine. I'll be even better when I make him pay for it later 10 times over." "Alright, let's get out. Leave Naruto-kun alone," exclaimed Hinata, assuming her soft fist position. She had to have courage to save Naruto despite her fear of the two Chunin. "What are you doing? Get outta here, I'll be fine," Naruto yelled at the pale-eyed heiress as he turned to face the strange girl in his class who frequently fainted. He gritted his teeth in agony as the Chunin pressed his heel deeper into his ribs. The wounded Chunin scoffed, "Ah, is the little Hyuga gonna save the little monster?" The two Chunin grinned mischievously. Despite their jeers and Naruto's cries for her to flee, Hinata refused to back down because she had to save Naruto, regardless of the price. As he gave Hinata a devastating backhand that sent her flying, the Chunin turned back to face her and smiled once more. When Hinata fell on her head, she bled profusely and crumpled into a battered ball. Naruto-kun was in danger, but her head hurt a lot where it was split open, and her face hurt where she was slapped. Hinata fought to get back up on her feet. As he kicked her legs out from under her, the Chunin who had struck her sneered and kicked her ribs, saying, "Just stay down you Hyuga brat, you won't win. Don't hurt her you son of a bitch." Naruto screamed as he fought to escape from underneath the boot that was pinning him, and Hinata let out a painful cry. When the Chunin who had been harming Hinata lifted her up and met her eyes, the other Chunins rolled their eyes. Before the man's icy onyx eyes turned red with 3 tiny tomos, Hinata gazed fearfully into them. Hinata would have been shocked to learn that Naruto and her were being harmed by Uchiha clan members if she hadn't been barely conscious. The Chunin standing on Naruto said angrily, "What are you doing? Now she'll know who we are." His partner hadn't given that much thought. He yelled, "Shut up, I know what I'm doing. You won't tell anyone about what happened here. You'll tell your family that you fell down the stairs to explain how you got hurt. If you tell anyone, I'll kill you," he said, pressing his gaze right into Hinata's eyes. The Chunin ignored Hinata's terrified expression as the tomos in his eyes started to spin. As he gave the order, Hinata fell unconscious. Now, sleep. Now, let's have some fun with the demon for shaming our family, he said to his friend as they both shunshined outside the village, throwing Hinata aside like yesterday's trash. After a few hours later, Hinata awoke to find herself alone in the darkness of the night. Her ribs hurt a lot, and a third of her face was covered in dried blood from her head wound, but she forced herself to stand. Her duty was to assist Naruto-kun. She was so terrified by the Uchiha's threat that she was at a loss for words, but the Hokage always insisted that you must be prepared to make sacrifices for the people you love. Kohona was great because of the will of fire, the ideal. She believed she understood the ideal despite her extreme youth. She used to cry when her family called her names and made fun of her, but now that Naruto was in danger, she had the strength to stand up for what she believed in. She knew that saving Naruto was the right thing to do, even if it meant losing her life before she could experience it. Hinata sought assistance from the only person who would be concerned if Naruto was harmed because she knew she had no chance against the two Uchihas. She sprinted to the Hokage's tower as quickly as she could. Alongside Naruto let out a silent scream. Hours ago, as the two unnamed Uchihas tormented him to the limit of human endurance, he had lost the ability to scream in agony, his throat raw from screaming non-stop. He ought to have passed away hours ago, but he was unable to accept death because of his capacity for healing. He just wanted the suffering to stop, so he cursed his talent. Whether he died or someone saved him didn't matter to him. In a cruel tone, one of the Uchiha questioned, "You had enough yet?" Desperate for the agony to stop, Naruto nodded his head in agreement. As Naruto took a knife out of its sheath, the same Chunin smiled at him with a sadistic glee. When Naruto opened one eye, he discovered it was a skinning knife. Naruto said, "Please, someone, anyone, help me," with clawed dread. Alongside Hinata, Hokage Sama, yelled Hinata as she stormed through the Hokage's door, utterly disregarding the receptionist. "Hinata?" inquired Hinata's father, Hiashi, bewildered. Hinata paused and gave her father a startled look before noticing that the civilian council and clan heads were crammed into the Hokage's office. She attempted to withdraw herself, feeling a little ashamed, before realizing that Naruto-kun needed assistance. Desperately, she yelled, "Hokage! Sama! Someone kidnapped Naruto-kun," in the hopes that the Hokage would take action. "What happened, child?" the god of shinobi asked in a comforting tone as Hiruzen Sarutobi froze for a moment, the girl appearing to be about to faint. Hinata started explaining what had happened to him and the councils. In addition to trying to defeat two Chunin, Hiashi was impressed by his daughter because she didn't falter once throughout the urgent story. "Dog, weasel," Hiruzen commanded as she finished, and the two Anbu captains gathered in the middle of the room. "Gather your teams and any other Anbu or ninja you can find and find Naruto at any costs. I will ask you this once, Fugaku. If you lie to me about this I will ruin you and your clan. Did you order the kidnapping of Uzumaki Naruto?" Hiruzen said in a bone-chilling tone as the two Anbu nodded before vanishing. How dare this man threaten him? Fugaku returned the Hokage's glare with one of his own. He was the Uchiha clan's leader, the most well-known clan, and he was deserving of respect. "No, I didn't give the order to harm Naruto, but I did punish my son appropriately after learning of his defeat by Naruto," he answered icily. "It is unlikely that it was even members of my clan. The girl must be lying or mistaken. I had trouble pronouncing that monster's name. Since the attack, his clan had not received the respect it deserved because of that demon." In response to Fugaku's accusations, Hinata's father said in a firm tone, "Fugaku-san. I would not recommend accusing my daughter in such a manner. Doing so could have consequences." This was before Hinata could argue that she was doing neither. "Enough," Hiruzen commanded, looking at Fugaku. He looked at Hiashi and said, "We are in a crisis. Naruto-kun has been taken by someone, Uchiha or not. This is not the time to argue." While Hiruzen looked for signs of dishonesty in Fugaku's eyes, he saw nothing but rage and hatred. "I am ending this meeting. Everyone leave save for Hiashi and his daughter," he then barked after nodding. Both men turned to face the diminutive Hyuga when the room was empty. "Hinata, what you did was incredibly brave," exclaimed the Hokage, guiding Hinata to a chair. It seemed as though the poor girl would be kneeling at any moment. "You did very well, Hinata." Hiashi nodded and commended the performance. Despite their simplicity, the young heiress found great meaning in those words. With a small smile, Hinata said, Thank you." Both men nodded and the Hokage said, "Now, let's get that head wound checked out, shall we? It looks rather nasty." with Enbu Kakashi ran through the forest at high speed with a young Itachi. Gathering their teams and setting up the search parties had taken them a few minutes. Kakashi's concern for his sensei's son was destroying his mind. Kakashi was extremely protective of Naruto, despite the fact that he had never spoken to the blonde outside of the few times he had comforted him following a nightmare. He intended to treat him like a brother from birth since, in a sense, he would be. In a roundabout way, Naruto would have been his younger brother because Minato had been like a father to him after he committed suicide. Following his sensei's death in the Kyuubi attack, Kakashi had gone to great lengths to gain custody of Naruto. The councils, both civilian and shinobi, had repeatedly prevented him from having the family he deserved. Because it wasn't fair that the Hitaki clan was given control of the village of Jinchuriki while no other clan was, they stopped him. When the councils formally declared that he would never be granted custody of his younger brother, he almost went on the rampage. Guy and the recently returned Asuma had to work together to prevent him from wreaking havoc on the village. When it became evident that he was unable to protect Naruto during the day as a family should, he went to the Hokage and requested, more accurately, demanded that he be added to Naruto's protection detail in order to shield him from the shadows. The Hokage consented, but only under the restrictions that he could never speak to Naruto and that he could not murder anyone who glared at him. The shinobi god was aware that if Kakashi had gotten to know his little brother, he wouldn't be able to justify leaving the village with Naruto in tow. Despite his frustration at being unable to communicate with his younger brother, Kakashi was able to negotiate with the Hokage to become Naruto's Junin sensei upon his genin status. Kakashi asked Itachi impatiently, "How much further?" "Not much further, but it may take some time to break through the genjutsus around the shack. Only those who specialize in torture in the Uchiha clan know the exact location of the shack. So keep an eye out," Itachi responded. When the Uchiha family discovered an enemy attempting to steal clan secrets, they used the aforementioned shack, a specialized torture chamber. For those who weren't Uchiha, it contained all the elements of your worst nightmares, and Itachi suspected that's where his clansmen had taken Naruto. They quickly started dispelling genjutsu after genjutsu to expose the torture shack's hiding place after arriving at its approximate location. It took them several minutes to get past the final genjutsu and discover the dilapidated shed. Was the high-pitched scream they heard, which could only be that of a child in excruciating pain. Kakashi went ahead and kicked the door in, abandoning a lifetime of training. All he could think about was saving his younger brother. The two Chunin, who had been skinning the demon alive, appeared startled by the unexpected interruption. Because Naruto recovered so quickly, they had to repeat the procedure 3 times. The Chunin on the right started to say, "How did you ga?" but was interrupted by Kakashi's Chidori, which pierced his heart, before he started to unhook Naruto from a blood-stained table while Itachi attended to his relatives. Kakashi tossed the now dead Uchiha aside like yesterday's trash. As he untrapped the boy, Kakashi attempted to console him, saying, hey, don't cry Naruto. It'll all be okay now, the bad men can't hurt you." But as soon as he unbuckled the final strap, Naruto leapt to his feet and ran as quickly as he could out the door. He just knew he had an opportunity to leave the terrible room, so he took it because he was in too much pain to think clearly or comprehend what the man was saying. Naruto ran as fast as he could, ignoring the pain in his raw legs. He had experienced far more pain than that, so he could put up with a little more if it meant getting away. Kakashi yelled, "Naruto," and ran after the frightened boy. Naruto was too far gone to pay attention, but the Junin's speed was too great for him given his severe injuries. He skidded to a stop in front of the masked man after Kakashi landed a few yards away from Naruto. "Naruto, I'm not going to hurt you. I promise," Kakashi said, trying to reassure the boy, but Naruto wasn't paying attention. Even though his skin was growing back quickly, he was still in excruciating pain that was numbing his mind. He could still feel the burns, the places where he was skinned alive, and a lot more. Instead of a savior, he saw someone attempting to return him to that room when he saw Kakashi in his path. Raising a scalpel he had swiped as he dashed through the door, Naruto leapt forward and charged Kakashi in a zigzag pattern. He attempted to swipe at the masked man's throat when he got there, but Kakashi stopped him by grabbing Naruto by the wrist. "Stop." Kakashi pleaded with the boy to stop, but Naruto rounded, housing his ribs instead. As he pinned the boy's leg to his body, Kakashi grunted in frustration, saying, "He moves like sensei." Kakashi thought, startled. Because he was an orphan, Minato Namikaze had no clan techniques and had to rely on speed and unpredictability to develop his own style of taijutsu. After that, Naruto threw a punch, but Kakashi sidestepped it. Naruto kicked away from Kakashi using his free leg. Naruto was in a panic. He was unable to return to that room. He was escaping, no matter the cost. After taking a deep breath, Naruto succumbed to instinct out of sheer panic. Using the scalpel as a distraction, Naruto charged Kakashi once more. Kakashi dodged, as was to be expected, but it provided Naruto with the necessary opening. Naruto charged a gorgeous spiraling ball in his right hand while yelling a war cry. He didn't really care and didn't know how he did it. How in the world was a 6-year-old boy using the Rasengan? Kakashi's eyes widened beneath his mask. Kakashi pushed the idea aside for later because he had to deal with a 6-year-old who was using his sensei's jutsu at the moment. The incomplete Rasengan imploded on itself before exploding when Kakashi grabbed Naruto's wrist and yanked it towards the ground. The explosion blew both Naruto and Kakashi backwards. Kakashi landed on his feet with practiced ease, while Naruto landed on his head like Hinata and was knocked out. Having just used sensei's jutsu, Kakashi approached Naruto with a feeling of awe. Naruto had just accomplished something so amazing that it was beyond description. Though he couldn't think of anyone, Kakashi pondered where Naruto might be able to acquire the high-ranking jutsu. Jiraiya Sama, the sensei, was one of only 3 individuals who could use the technique. As well as himself, he had learned the jutsu from none of them. When he woke up, Kakashi thought he would have to ask him. He searched for his partner, but he didn't seem to be in the area. Using a Doden jutsu, Kakashi flew through a few hand signs and rearranged the earth to resemble it before Naruto's flawed Rasengan. In order to shield Naruto from Danzo and other people who might want to harm him, he wanted to keep his secret. Danzo was already pleading with the Hokage to allow him to turn Naruto into a mindless weapon. If he found out, his pleading would only get worse, and the civilian council would probably demand that Naruto be put to death for tarnishing the Yondaim's reputation. A bunch of naive fools. When he picked Naruto up bridal style after destroying all the evidence, he was struck by how light Naruto was. Before he shinshined to the hospital, he thought, "I'm so sorry, little brother." When Naruto woke up, his lungs were filled with the pungent odor of alcohol, medicine, and hypodermic needles. Naruto opened his eyes and squinted at the intense light, confirming that he was indeed where he believed he was, the medical facility. He blinked slowly, bewildered. The man who was attempting to return him to that room was the last thing he remembered before everything exploded and turned black. When the memories of what had transpired in that room suddenly came back to Naruto, he froze in fear. Naruto tried to push the memories away, but they came back like an ugly sea beast. He let out a sob before smothering the tears that were trying to escape his eyes. "I'm not in tears. Never again will I cry," he vowed, and in contrast to earlier, he was able to control his tears. Naruto inhaled deeply before pushing himself up into a sitting position. Aside from the phantom pains, he felt fine. He was just queasy. He recognized the Hokage when he heard the door open. Hesitantly, Hiruzen said, "Ah, Naruto-kun, I see you already awake." His heart ached for his surrogate grandson, and he had listened to Kakashi and Itachi's accounts of what transpired, minus what Kakashi had left out. The atrocities that had occurred in that cursed room shouldn't have to be endured by anyone, least of all a defenseless child. In contrast to Kakashi, Itachi had spared the second Chunin, and both Anko and he had personally questioned him. Even Anko, who was as deranged as they come, had been sickened upon hearing what they had done to Naruto. Fugaku was furious that Hiruzen had ordered the man's execution, but since he was under his authority, he was forced to follow Hiruzen's decision. Hiruzen wanted to do a lot more, but he was limited in what he could do. Without evidence that he was lying, Hiruzen was powerless to take action against the Uchiha clan as a whole. Fugaku asserts that he did not give the order for the 2 shinobi to harm Naruto and that they were acting freely. Naruto fixed a 1,000-yard stare on Hiruzen. With eyes that did not belong to a child, eyes that belonged to shinobi who had witnessed too many battles, he stared into Naruto's lifeless eyes and felt a tidal wave of shame and failure rise within his chest. He lost much of the warmth that had been in his eyes, as well as their innocence. He realized then that he had let his late successor down. The Hokage sat down in the chair and Naruto watched him closely. Although he appeared emotionless, he was becoming agitated on the inside due to the Hokage sitting so close to him. Naruto had always enjoyed Jiji's company, so this was new to him. Hiruzen cast a worried glance at Naruto. In an attempt to get the boy to open up about what had happened to him, he asked, "How are you feeling, Naruto-kun? Do you wish to talk about what happened?" Shaking his head, Naruto said, "I'm fine." His voice was the same as always, but for some reason the Hokage didn't hear it that way. More worldly and mature, but perhaps that was to be expected. Recalling what had transpired in the room, Naruto paused. He wanted to discuss it with Gigi, but he was afraid for some reason. His concern was that Gigi would eventually come to the conclusion that Naruto was too different from the other villagers to be around. He was afraid that Gigi would no longer love him if he told him what had happened. He also recalled the events leading up to his abduction and Hinata's heroic efforts to save him. Naruto's dejected expression gave way to worry as he asked, "Is Hinata-chan okay? She was beat up pretty bad when she tried to rescue me." After experiencing some of the most agonizing torments imaginable, Hiruzen blinked and felt love for the boy surge. However, he was worried about the courageous young girl who had attempted to save him. Naruto and Minato looked exactly alike at that moment. To a relieved looking Naruto, he grinned and said, "Yes, she is doing just fine, Naruto-kun. She had a concussion and required a few stitches, but that is all." If she had died attempting to save him, he was unsure of what he would have done. "What's so funny?" asked Naruto, after the Hokage laughed and he gave him a curious look. The Hokage laughed once more and said, "You just reminded me of someone as all my boy." Naruto asked, "Who?" inquiring as to whom he had brought Gigi to mind. Hiruzen contemplated telling Naruto a lie, but he had endured enough pain. For the simple reason that he did not want to bring up the boy's father, he declined to elaborate. He grinned and remarked, "You just reminded me of the Yondaime." He was amused by Naruto's shocked expression. "Really?" he asked, sounding incredulous. He was shocked to discover that he shared traits with his hero. "Yes. Do you wish to hear how?" Hiruzen nodded, and Naruto followed suit. Hiruzen reasoned that he could tell Naruto about his idol as long as he didn't mention any significant people. Many years ago, at the start of the Third Shinobi War, before young Minato had either become Hokage or created the Hirei Shinjutsu, which earned him the nickname, Konohamaru's Yellow Flash. At the start of the war, Minato was a Junin assigned to take control of and hold a bridge that would allow us to sneak up on Kumo. Minato was able to take control of the bridge with ease because he was incredibly strong for his age, but he suffered losses and was left holding the bridge alone with 3 other Junin. Following the attack, Kumo was furious that Konoha had created a path for us to attack them, so they sent out multiple platoons to retake the bridge in an attempt to humiliate us and demonstrate that any ground we gained could be easily reclaimed. As he used his toad summons to scout ahead, Minato learned about the platoons. Do you know what he did when he realized the enemy would attempt to retake the bridge? Captivated by the Hokage's story, Naruto shook his head. Naruto was still a 6-year-old who loved to hear a good story, even after his horrific experiences a few days prior. It was made even better by the fact that it was about his hero. He made the decision to hold his ground because he understood the bridge's value and that retaking it would have been 10 times more difficult due to the additional ninjas protecting it. He sent a messenger toad to Konoha for reinforcements and gave his men orders to get ready for battle. Minato and his team held the bridge like the world depended on it despite the enemy arriving 2 days ahead of schedule. Despite being outnumbered, they continued to fight, using jutsu after jutsu, even after their chakras ran out. As the day went on, though, they were reduced to 3 Junin, then 2, and finally just Minato, who was defending the bridge against a third of a platoon. He refused to let his comrades' sacrifices be in vain, and despite being severely wounded and on the verge of Oding from taking too many soldier pills, he fought on, holding the bridge for a full day by himself. Only a third of the initial number of enemy ninja were left after he successfully pushed back wave after wave of them on his own before reinforcements arrived. Kumo was furious that they couldn't retake the bridge, so they made the decision that if they couldn't, then nobody else could. Despite his fear for his hero, Naruto remained silent. The reinforcements arrived and treated Minato for his wounds, but while just about everyone was asleep, the Kumo ninja snuck in and placed explosive tags on the bridge. Naruto gripped the sheets tightly, waiting to see what would come next. Hiruzen grinned a little when he saw this, but he went on. Kumo set off the explosive tags in the middle of the night, and the bridge was destroyed right away. Fortunately, not many of our ninja were hurt by the first blast because they weren't camped on the bridge, but big pieces of debris rained on their nearby camp. Despite his severe injuries, Minato saw a big piece of debris would fall on a red-headed ninja. With his signature speed, he pushed her away and decided to let the debris fall on him instead, protecting the red-headed kunoichi. Once he and the kunoichi were safe, the debris broke several of young Minato's bones, causing him to lose blood and pass out. When he woke up a few days later, despite having just been through a lot, he asked me first if the kunoichi was alright. Naruto's eyes widened at that. You reminded me of him not only because your first concern was of another, but also because Minato was an orphan like you. Few people bothered to find out how Yondaime got started, even though everyone was aware of his accomplishments. Naruto never would have guessed that he was an orphan like him, but most people assumed that he was from a small, unknown clan. Really? He inquired incredulously. Naruto couldn't believe that? Who in his right mind doubts the man who became the Yondaime? Hiruzen laughed at Naruto's absurd expression before adding, "Yes." The Hokage nodded. "Yes, he was very much like you, Naruto-kun. Almost nobody believed in him. No one thought he would ever achieve anything, because he lacked a clan. They all believed he was untrustworthy or that he would never grow strong. But he was unfazed by that. He continued to train despite everything they said or did. He fueled their skepticism, and you know what happened as a result." In the hopes that his tale would encourage the boy to see past what had transpired, Hiruzen concluded. Naruto was silent. He could easily compare himself to the Yondaime and could see what Gigi was doing. Naruto gazed down at his hands thoughtfully, wanting to follow in the Yondaime's footsteps to ignore the pain and doubts and use them as motivation to keep going and accomplish great things. Then he started to reflect on how he had always aspired to be like the Yondaime. Why couldn't he just put it aside? If the Yondaime could succeed and become one of the greatest heroes in history, why couldn't he? He had even endured more hardship than the late Hokage, which meant that he had even more fuel than the Yondaime, so he could grow stronger than the Yondaime. A determined glint returned to Naruto's eye, and Hiruzen felt a surge of pride in his chest. They no longer appeared as lifeless as they had just seconds before, though it was still true that they weren't as bright as they had been before yet, which wasn't surprising given what the child had been through. "I will outperform the Yondaime Gigi. You just observe," Naruto cried out before leaping from his bed and through the window. Fortunately, he was on the first floor. He was ready to begin his training and felt much better now, but first he needed to visit his apartment. The Hokage laughed at Naruto's antics and walked out of the room, but a doctor came up to him before he could leave the hospital. "Hokage. Sama. Would you mind giving me a moment of your time?" With a slightly urgent tone, the doctor said, "I think there's something you should see in Naruto's chart." Hiruzen looked alarmed and swiftly looked over the chart for any anomalies, his eyes widening when he saw one. Patient. Uzumaki Naruto, 6 years old, 3 feet 9. Blonde hair, color blue eyes, level of chakra, high, Kage. This has to be an error. As he handed back the chart, Hiruzen said, "Pardon me, Hokage. Sama, but we have run the test again." Hiruzen froze at the thought of Naruto being the Jinchuriki of the Kyuubi, but even Kushina's chakra levels weren't that high at Naruto's age. "This is the 20th time on 4 different machines," the doctor said in a tone that bordered on fear, adding that he had never seen such chakra levels in any ninja. The only plausible explanation was that it was due to the Yondaime's seal, which Jiraiya had mentioned also served as a filter for the Kyuubi's chakra, explaining that a tiny percentage of the beast's chakra was purified once a week before combining with Naruto's. Could it be that this tiny percentage was sufficient to raise Naruto's levels to this level? As he left the building, he couldn't help but smile a little because he thought Naruto was the only person who could outperform the Yondaime. At the apartment of Naruto. The apartment was small, but Naruto thought the balcony made up for it. His furniture had seen better days long before he had purchased it. His bed had more holes and springs protruding from it than it had inside, and the paint on the walls was chipping and stained in the areas that weren't covered in graffiti, all of which were covered by dozens of posters of movies he had never seen because he wasn't allowed in the movie theater. None of this bothered him. He would make the most of it because this was his home. Before deciding how he was going to begin training, Naruto entered his tiny kitchen to prepare some ramen and saw a small green scroll resting in the middle of his table. Incredulously, Naruto surveyed his tiny apartment, wondering how someone had entered and why a scroll had been left for him. Reaching for the scroll, he opened it. 6 a.m. Exercise. Taijutsu training at 8 a.m. 9 a.m. Training in ninjutsu. 10 o'clock 3 p.m. If expelled, the academy or library. 4 p.m. Control of chakras. 6 p.m. Training with weapons. 7 p.m. Training in kenjutsu. 8 p.m. Training in fuinjutsu. 9 p.m. Meditation. Naruto was taken aback by the contents of the scroll. He had been wondering how he should train and now he had the answer. He assumed that the Hokage had asked one of his ninja to escape from his apartment after he had left the hospital, and while he was a little irritated that someone had broken in, he overcame it when he saw the awesome training he had in store. A little more unraveling of the scroll revealed a few seals, which he recognized, so he channeled a small amount of chakra into it at the urging of his instincts, and more scrolls appeared, one for each element, all D-ranked elemental jutsus. With great excitement, he infused chakra into the remaining 3 seals: a wooden bakken, sealing supplies, a kunai, a shuriken, and several books on taijutsu and kenjutsu styles, fuinjutsu, chakra control exercises, and a book titled 101 Things a Shinobi Needs to Know. His schedule detailing his physical training activities was also in the stack. Excited, Naruto gazed at the small stack of new training materials that had accumulated on his table. When he noticed that it was just a little after 4, he hurriedly sealed everything back up without even considering how he would do it. He then headed to a nearby training field with his new sealing supplies, Bakken, and the scrolls for chakra control, taijutsu and kenjutsu styles, as well as a meditation scroll. Just above his doorway, he blew past the concealed Kakashi. Because Naruto was the last Uzumaki and the last Namikaze, he deserved to be properly taught. Even though he had used the Rasengan, it wasn't enough to protect him from everything. Kakashi grinned under his mask, pleased that his younger brother was content with the training schedule he had set out for him. He wanted Naruto to practice both Minato and Kushina's abilities. After all, it takes a well-rounded ninja to defeat someone as strong as Naruto's father with just one technique, and Kakashi wanted to help Naruto develop into a well-rounded ninja so he could fulfill his dream. Ultimately, Sensei had the same desire, Naruto. Naruto was making his way to the training ground through the crowded market. He always took this route, but this time, something was different. People continued to glare at him as he passed, but for some reason it felt heavier, and the glares had the same level of animosity and hatred. They all appeared to be the same. But to Naruto, it was like a heavy weight had been placed on his shoulders, and he would flinch at every loud noise, ready to fight or run at the drop of a hat. His eyes were darting wildly, taking note of everything: threats, escape routes, things that could be used as weapons, and things that he could use to delay or divert an attacker. His palms were sweating frantically as he felt waves of anxiety when someone came a little too close for him. Unaware that he was having a panic attack, Naruto was breathing shallowly and fighting to stop his heart from racing. The boy suddenly lost it and started running away from the packed market, knocking over a cart of cabbages but ignoring the man's cries because he had to leave. Until he arrived at the remote training area, Naruto didn't slow down. Once he did, he was searching his mind for the reason behind his condition. Naruto took deep breaths to calm himself because he had never been so anxious, almost terrified that someone would try to hurt him. Naruto thought sadly, I guess it may be harder to put it behind me than I thought. He wanted the incident to never happen again, but it seemed to have affected him more than he had initially believed. Nevertheless, he would rather live with the panic attacks for the rest of his life than have the two people who had ever shown him kindness treat him the same way as everyone else. Despite his loud and ADD ways, Naruto was an avid reader. Few people knew this, but reading was one of his few escapes from the harsh reality of his life because books would never glare at him and, for reasons he did not know, they never denied him the right to exist. Maybe training will help, he muttered to himself as he picked up the chakra control scroll and started reading. No matter who read them, books just wanted to be read. Faster than any sponge, Naruto absorbed the information from the first chapter of the scroll, which described the leaf chakra control exercise and its various stages. To begin, he needed a leaf, which he found quite easily in the forest. The remaining information was blocked by some kind of seal. The first step was to use chakra to make it adhere to the user's forehead. According to the book, children of his age could master this step in as little as an hour or two. To his astonishment, the leaf blew away from his head the instant he dropped his hand, as if it were being blown away by a hurricane, before burning up due to intense chakra. Naruto started to channel chakra to the point of contact by sticking the leaf to his forehead. Naruto blinked slowly in bewilderment. The scroll certainly didn't mention that. He grabbed another leaf in mild annoyance, but the same thing happened each time, and he began to grow irate. How could this be a basic skill? This was absolutely impossible. 30 minutes later, he was sighing to himself as he reached for another leaf when he noticed a small pebble next to it. Ignoring the leaf, he picked it up and carefully examined it, thinking, if it works with a leaf, then it should work with a rock, right? He put the pebble on the tip of his finger before channeling some chakra and aiming it at a nearby tree. The pebble blew off his fingertip as it should have, but Naruto was not prepared for it to pass through the tree or for a loud eep to be heard before a young girl fell from the bushes a foot from the pebble's path. A little disturbed that he was being spied on, Naruto blinked in bewilderment before realizing it was the girl. Hinata, who had been spying on Naruto since he had arrived at the clearing, stood up and looked at him in shame. She had been checking on him since he had arrived at the clearing, and when she saw him running in the crowded market, she followed him and left her guard co behind. Hinata was dressed in her typical beige jacket, which was a size or two too large, and black shinobi pants, but Naruto was more interested in the white bandages that were wrapped around her head where it had exploded. Because he was proud of his daughter, Hiyashi had decided to have Hinata get stitches rather than ninja medical healing. He made the bandages and stitches badges of honor because she had been brave enough to defend someone against two Chunin ninja, and he was a little irritated that it was the village of Jinchuriki, but he would accept it. Looking at Hinata's bandages, Naruto was overcome with guilt because he remembered how hurt she had been when she attempted to save him. Naruto gazed at Hinata, his blue eyes absorbing every detail as she flushed violently. "Why?" he asked in a hushed whisper. Hinata looked up in confusion. What? You tried to save me, but why?" she asked. Naruto asked his entire query. "B. Because didn't want them to hurt you and Naruto-kun." Hinata blushed and started to play with her fingers, a nervous habit she had developed. She stammered out, then looked down at the ground in shame. "I'm sorry that I couldn't save you." Her tone was upset, almost tearful, as she expressed her anger at not being able to do more. Did they hurt you?" she asked, looking up at Naruto, who appeared to be questioning everything he knew about his life. Recalling what the ruthless Uchiha had said, she inquired. Naruto looked down at the ground as well, a tormented expression plastered on his face. "Yes," was his straightforward response. After her fears were validated, Hinata felt like crying. Before she could stop herself, she said, What did they do?" With tears stinging his eyes, Naruto continued to stare at the ground. He answered in a broken tone, "Bad things." Even though Hinata was so young, she knew what bad things were because she came from a clan of ninjas that didn't protect their kids from the horrors of the shinobi's harsh life. Without giving it any thought, she crossed the distance and gave Naruto the hug he sorely needed. A few tearful tears spilled from Hinata's eyes. She didn't have romantic feelings for Naruto. She was only 6 years old, which was years too young for her to even consider boys in that way, and all she knew was that Naruto was practically radiating sadness, and she wanted it to stop. However, Hinata was a good-hearted person who wanted to see sadness end, especially in Naruto. The only way she could think of to do so was to make physical contact. The feeling of someone putting their arms around him left Naruto speechless. He could count on one hand the number of times he had ever been hugged, and they were all from Gigi. He never would have imagined that he would ever embrace a girl. They were IKY, but Hinata was less so. Because Hinata was his own age and, although he was bullied by children his own age, he was never beaten. Naruto was so taken aback by the embrace that he was unable to even consider having a panic attack or feeling like he was about to be attacked. However, the main reason was that he somehow felt he could trust Hinata, seeing firsthand that she was prepared to take a beating to save him, something he had never done for him, that he knew of. Naruto calmly put his arms around Hinata and simply relished the comforting touch, feeling something he had never felt before as his anxieties and fears subsided. Acceptance. He never experienced unconditional acceptance before, and he found that he actually enjoyed the feeling. Perhaps he inherited it from Gigi and Iruka Sensei, but he was constantly worried that they would despise him if he made a big mistake. Before Naruto broke the embrace, he kept his hands on her shoulders as they stood there embracing for a few minutes. With an honest tone, he said, "Thank you." Hinata blushed but muttered, "You're welcome." After a few awkward seconds, Naruto said, Hinata-chan, would you like to train with me?" He lowered his arms and grinned slightly. He asked hesitantly, unsure of how to phrase it or what to do at this point. After a moment of hesitation, Hinata blushed and nodded, saying, I would enjoy tea. That Naruto-kun. She didn't even consider how upset her guard Ko would be to think he had lost her. After grinning, Naruto took her hand and guided her to the tree where he had hidden the scrolls and other training aids. Presenting the scroll to her, he explained, "I'm practicing chakra control right now. I'm doing the leaf training exercise but I'm having some trouble with it." Hinata accepted the scroll with gratitude, keeping from Naruto the fact that she already knew how to perform the exercise, not only because of her clan, but also because they had mastered it in class last week. Naruto was unaware of this because his teacher had expelled him for an unspecified reason. "I am grateful to Naruto-kun. I noticed that you were experiencing some difficulties. Would you be interested in my assistance?" Hinata asked, hoping she wouldn't offend her new friend. Naruto smiled sheepishly. "You saw that? I suppose you did when I nearly threw that pebble at you. In any case, can you assist me?" "Really?" Naruto inquired. After Hinata nodded, she activated her Byakugan. Naruto was amazed by the dojutsu and exclaimed, "Wow! Your eyes are really awesome. What are they doing?" "This is my Kekkei Genkai, the Byakugan," he said excitedly, and Hinata blushed a little at the compliment on her Kekkei Genkai but clarified what her eyes could see. Most people were unaware that she was among the first Hyuga to activate their Kekkei Genkai, but she proudly explained, "It allows me to see all around me and page people's chakra network, and then I can use my Circa clan's taijutsu s. Style the gentle fist to close an enemy's T tenketsu." Before stating, "Thanks for helping me, but how exactly are you going to?" Naruto dazzled once more. Naruto pondered. She went on to say, "I'm going to see how much Circa chakra you're using and tell you if you're using too much or too little." Naruto nodded and took another leaf before applying it to his forehead. "Are you ready?" When she nodded, he asked and began to shape chakra. Hinata could only gape as she paid close attention to Naruto's chakra coils. Previously, she had only been demonstrating the appearance of her Kekkei Genkai and was unable to see Naruto's chakra network. He had more chakra than anyone she had ever seen, and she had previously examined the Hokage's chakra coils. She was so taken aback that she neglected to inform Naruto of the appropriate amount of chakra to use. "Hinata-chan? Is everything alright?" he inquired in a worried voice. Naruto was alarmed by Hinata's resemblance to a fish that was struggling to breathe. After giving a stupid nod, Hinata awoke and exclaimed, "Yeah, I'm fine." With awe still in her voice, she said, You're using too much chakra." "How much too much?" Naruto inquired. Naruto started to perspire as she said, About 1,000 times too much." "Really? That much? Well, how about right now?" As he sharply reduced the chakra concentration, he asked. Then, before Hinata said that Naruto was using just enough chakra for the leaf to stick, he dropped his hand holding up the leaf and, miraculously, it didn't shoot off at 100 miles per hour. Still too much, but you're only about an 100 times too much now. "Awesome. Hinata-chan, thank you," Naruto exclaimed with the leaf still sticking to him, ecstatic that he finally got the blasted leaf to stick, and it was all thanks to Hinata and her special eyes. Hinata smiled sweetly at him, happy that she could have helped. "Why, you're welcome, and Naruto-kun." After grinning, Naruto picked up a leaf nearby and held it out to her, saying, "Now try." As Hinata extended her hand to take the leaf, the two of them heard a loud cry, "Hinata-sama." When Hinata turned around, she saw her guard Ko, who was enraged. "Hinata-sama, get out of the way of the monster." After shouting, he quickly moved across the distance, grabbed Hinata by the wrist, and yanked her away from Naruto. Hinata looked up at Ko, perplexed, but then realized she was talking about Naruto. To say that Ko was taken aback by the gesture would be an understatement of the century. Ko had never witnessed the gentle and kind Hinata glare at anyone. In fact, he didn't even believe she knew how to glare, much less send him such a harsh and angry one as she was doing now. Hinata yanked her wrist out of Ko's hand and glared up at her guard. "Ko-san." Hinata spoke in a mature tone, not stuttering except when she stumbled over the word, "appreciate." "I would greatly appreciate it if you would not call Naruto-kun such a cruel name." At this point, Ko was beginning to wonder if this was actually Hinata-sama at all, as Hinata practically sounded like the Hyuga heiress, and she was constantly stuttering too much to finish a sentence, not to mention the authoritative tone. Before a tiny smile appeared on his lips, Naruto gave Hinata a startled look as well. "Don't worry, Hinata-chan. But Naruto-kun," he said, drawing a dejected expression from Hinata. "I'm used to it by now." "It's okay," said Naruto, who appeared to be much older than he actually was. He smiled and said, "I suppose you should go home so your family won't be worried." When the extremely shy Hinata first confronted him and glared, Ko started to suspect that someone had put a genjutsu on him. Now, the demon brat was acting worried about the Hyuga heiress. What in Kami's name was going on here? Was he under any genjutsu? Apparently not after he damaged his chakra. "Hinata-sama, why? Yes." Hinata gave Naruto one last glance before nodding that she was prepared to depart. "You're late for training," he said, attempting to move the conversation along quickly to avoid further issues with the main branch. After the two of them departed, Naruto spent a few more hours training. He began his kenjutsu training with his new Bakken, as the scroll in his apartment stated, and he chose to begin with the Uzumaki kenjutsu style, also known as the Whirlpool of Blades, but Naruto was unaware of this. Naruto adapted to the style like a fish to water, practically mastering the basic katas in the hour he spent practicing. He couldn't explain it, but the movements felt instinctive to him, as if his body knew what to do. He spent some time practicing with the shuriken and kunai, aiming at falling leaves and trees. He was able to hit every other leaf with his throws, but he missed every other one. He then began training in fuinjutsu, and there is no way to explain how quickly he mastered the art of better than a duck to water, faster than a bird to the skies, and faster than an Uzumaki. Naruto absorbed the information in the first chapter and fully understood it, which was nearly unprecedented outside of the Uzumaki and Naruto's natural talent for the art. As he read, he had blown past the seals that attempted to stop him from reading ahead. Even though he didn't learn how to make seals in the scroll, he did learn the concepts behind Fuinjutsu. Finally, Naruto started his meditation. He assumed the lotus position and attempted to enter his mindscape as the scroll had instructed, but he encountered unexpected resistance. Each time he attempted to enter his mindscape, he was met with a large white wall that blocked his path, and no matter what he did, he was never successful. After an hour of trying to break the wall and looking through the scroll for answers, he decided to ask Gigi about the mysterious wall if he couldn't find the answer in the library. He packed up everything after the last hour and went back to his apartment. With Hinata while training after a rigorous training session, Hinata sat in her clan's dojo waiting for her father to give her a lecture about how he was disappointed in her for not taking her training seriously, despite the fact that she was behind on her gentle fist training. He would then look at her with those cruel, disillusioned eyes that were almost identical to Naruto's, and he would insult her by calling her a failure. Then, if she was lucky, she wouldn't have to hide behind bushes or walls, but she would still cry and seek solace in Naruto's company. Perhaps he would even give her the same hug she had given him earlier, or perhaps he would let her train with him once more. Recalling how pleasant Naruto had felt, Hinata blushed. She wasn't sure why, but it was likely embarrassment at her audacity. When her father entered and glared at her, Hinata prepared herself in her mind for the inevitable lecture. "Where did you train in the afternoon?" Hiyashi asked, wanting to hear his daughter's response even though he already knew the answer. I was training with Naruto-kun, she replied, squirming in anticipation of the stern tone. "I understand." He would never have believed Ko if he hadn't told him that Hinata had gone missing for an hour while in his care and that she had taken a stand when he insulted Naruto after he found her again. "Very well," Hisahi said, taking pleasure in the bewildered expression on his daughter's face. But perhaps it wasn't so hard to believe after all, when he recalled that Hinata had bravely attacked two Chunin in the boy's defense. He had been trying to get Hinata to stand up to someone since her mother died, and he couldn't express how happy he was that she was finally doing so. He had been trying to remove the crippling kindness from her through rigorous training that left her bruised and battered, and he tried verbally attacking her when the training didn't work, which if anything made her more shy and withdrawn. He was running out of ideas, everything was failing, and if something didn't happen soon, she would lose her title as the heiress. She only needed someone to defend her rights. It turned out, did he wish it had been someone other than Jinchuriki from the village? Yes, but he much preferred her being with him to her continuing to be the timid, insecure, shy failure that she was now. Wondering if her ears were playing tricks on her, Hinata blinked a few times. Father? You're not mad, are you?" She stammered more as she asked, fearing it was a cruel joke meant to undermine her confidence. "No," Hiyashi said with a small smile. "I would have been furious with you if you hadn't been training and if you hadn't confronted Ko. I take it you want to keep training with Naruto? You may continue to train with Naruto on the condition that you must not fall further behind in your gentle fist training than you already are and that you must ditch Ko to do so?" Hiyashi asked, and Hinata nodded eagerly. Hiyashi was impressed by Hinata's capacity to let her guard down. Because he was exceptionally talented for a branch member only seconded to his late brother Neji Ko had been specifically chosen to guard Hinata. However, escaping a Hyuga was no easy feat in and of itself. Even as a child, he could never escape his guard for even 5 minutes, much less nearly an hour. Although it was risky for her to go out alone, Hiyashi was sure that nothing would happen to Hinata as long as Naruto was present. If he was really Minato's son, he would fend off any assailants long enough for assistance to arrive. He wanted her to practice the skill because it would be crucial for her shinobi career. Hiyashi, who hadn't seen Hinata this joyful since before her mother passed away, blinked in surprise as she attempted to hide her happiness but was unable to do so when a broad smile appeared on her face. With a low bow, Hinata said, "Thank you, Dad." She spoke without faltering. Hiyashi nodded after grinning inwardly. Hinata leapt to her feet and obeyed, saying, "Since you missed today's training, do 10 laps around the courtyard." And she still had a tiny smile on her lips at the end of the day. The following day the first person in the classroom was Naruto, who was a little worn out from his almost crazy workout that morning. He had almost passed out when he read the details of the physical training, which began with 5 laps around the village, followed by 50 pull-ups, which were immediately followed by 100 push-ups, then the same number of sit-ups, crunches, and squats, followed by a variety of other exercises that he couldn't really explain other than the fact that they were extremely painful and difficult. It appears that whoever assigned him the workout was aware of his extraordinary stamina. After finishing on schedule, he immediately began training in taijutsu, choosing to begin with the cheetah style, which emphasized lightning. Fast and unpredictable attacks, exactly what he was looking for. It had gone smoothly, but not as smoothly or quickly as he had learned the other things. He had a great talent for it, but occasionally the movements felt awkward. He was confused when his instincts told him to do something different from what the scroll in front of him instructed him to do, but he tried his best to ignore them because he knew the stances were correct. Ninjutsu, his favorite, came next. He had collected all the scrolls, but he had ultimately chosen to practice the Academy 3 because he so badly wanted to be able to breathe fire or shoot lightning out of his fingertips, but he knew that these skills weren't necessary to graduate. Perhaps he could receive extra credit for them, but they weren't a priority. He practiced and refined the Henjutsu, trying to add more small details to make it perfect. It's the solid version, but it wasn't perfect yet. But he didn't make much progress with the Kawarimi Jutsu, so he figured it was his chakra control and decided he would train that extra hard today. He then went home to clean up and go to school. Iruka Sensei gave him the book about the founders of Konoha before class began, and he read it while sitting in the quiet corner at the back of the room. He had another panic attack on the way to the academy, so he concluded that people were the cause of the attacks. Iruka was concerned about Naruto. He had heard that he had been abducted over the weekend, but that was all he knew. He had no idea who had abducted him or what had happened to him while he was in captivity, but it was clear that the boy had been traumatized. It seemed as though Naruto's personality completely changed. He was silent now, despite the fact that every other seat in the classroom was occupied, and he avoided attention like it was the plague. Naruto was always noisy and almost annoying, desperate for any kind of attention. When kids started filing in and taking their seats, Iruka decided to ask Naruto what happened after class instead of asking if everything was alright. All of the students chose to ignore Naruto despite not noticing the change in his personality. A gentle voice asked Naruto, who was still reading, "Can I sit here?" Hinata asked. Naruto looked up from his book and smiled at Hinata. Sure. In all honesty, he half expected Hinata to stay away from him during the day so that no one would find out that she was friends with the demon. The fact that she didn't want it known didn't bother him, he was just glad to have a friend. With a grateful smile, Hinata sat down beside Naruto and listened to the lesson that was starting. Iruka was discussing the structure of genin teams and the significance of teamwork. Class passed by rather quickly, and some students were giving Naruto curious looks because he usually interrupted a lesson at least once, but today he had been silent. They were also perplexed by Hinata's presence, wondering why anyone would want to be friends with the freak and whether her parents hadn't told her to keep her distance from him like theirs did. When their lunch break came, Hinata and Naruto sat under the tree with the swing as far away from the other children as possible so that Naruto could eat in peace. When Hinata noticed that all Naruto had for lunch was cold ramen, he was gracious enough to share some of her lunch, and Naruto thanked her several times and said he would bring her something tomorrow. "So, Dobi, it appears that you've finally figured out where you belong." After telling his father that he had lost to the Dobi, Sasuke made him train hard all night because without his mother's herbs, he wouldn't be able to stand, and even with them, he barely could days later. "It's about time. I'm glad the lessons that my cousins taught you took," Sasuke said behind Naruto, remarking on how he was silent during class. However, two Chunin of his clan had approached him before the intense training session and asked if the rumors were real. Sasuke didn't know what they did to Naruto, but he was glad he had learned a lesson in humility. He had been hesitant to confirm them, but when he did, they assured him that Naruto would pay for embarrassing their clan. His constant yapping in class was annoying, and he couldn't outshine his brother if there were distractions like Naruto. Did this Uchiha Teme have the gall to declare that he was glad that he had been tortured for hours on end? Naruto froze, wondering if he had simply heard what he believed he had heard. Uncontrollable waves of pure, unadulterated rage swept through Naruto. Hinata, who was horrified by Sasuke's words but had only a hazy notion of what had happened to him at the hands of his cousins, looked horrified. Naruto blamed Sasuke for his fate, saying that he wouldn't have to go through hell at the hands of his cousins if Sasuke hadn't told anyone that he lost or if he had been better and beaten the Uchiha. Naruto had never been this furious, and he wanted to beat him until he had the consistency of pudding. When Hinata put a light hand on Naruto's wrist as he was getting ready to beat the living daylights out of Sasuke, Naruto gave her a confused and angry look, a little irritated that she was attempting to prevent him from giving the Uchiha a good beating, but he knew she must have a good reason. After blushing a little, Hinata said, "D.Don T Naruto.kun." Naruto wanted to argue that the Teme deserved to have his face smashed in, but he realized that she was correct. He's not worth it. He knew that when Hinata said he wasn't worth it, she probably meant some deep reason like he would be no better than them if he did, but Naruto was much more worried about Hinata's opinion of him. If he knocked Sasuke into next week, he He would not only disappoint Hinata, and his family would come after him again, and Sasuke simply wasn't worth that. Hinata smiled at him and then offered him a cinnamon bun that she had smuggled into her lunch, which Naruto accepted while completely ignoring the irate Sasuke. Naruto sat back down with a huff, giving Sasuke a glare as he did so. Who did these two losers think they were? He was a Uchiha, and they were dirt underfoot. How dare they say he's not worth anything? The belief that the Uchiha clan was Kami's greatest gift to humanity, that they were Konohamaru's elite, and that anyone who wasn't a Uchiha was garbage that should only be associated with if it couldn't be avoided had all but been crushed by his father. His older brother, who was as strong as he was because he was a Uchiha and Sasuke was going to overtake him one day, attempted to convince him that the clan's ideals were incorrect, but Sasuke would not listen. Nobody insults Sasuke and gets away with it. He was a Uchiha, and his father told him that he was the best, so he clenched his fists in rage and threw himself at Naruto. Sasuke threw a punch at Naruto's face, but Naruto grabbed his wrist and forced him to land on the ground next to his head. Naruto punched upwards, hitting Sasuke in the mouth before he put a foot on his stomach and threw him over. Sasuke tackled Naruto from behind, causing him to fall onto his back, and Sasuke was above him. Sasuke somehow regained his balance first and threw another fist at Naruto in an attempt to repay him for the punch, but a blue-haired girl leapt in front of the attack before it could reach Naruto's cheek as the two boys scurried to stand up and attack each other. Hinata was knocked sideways by the blow. She had attempted to break up the fight between the two boys because no teachers were present to witness it, but she intervened too late and was struck instead. He clenched his fist in rage and glared at the Uchiha, wishing he could completely destroy Sasuke for hurting his one friend. However, Hinata grabbed his wrist again and looked up at him with pleading eyes, knowing that if he beat the Teme up again, Naruto might get hurt again. Please don't fight Naruto. Naruto's voice grew deeper until it was almost a growl, almost inhuman, and he said, "You're lucky Hinata. Chan doesn't want me to hurt you. But if you ever hurt her again, I'll kill you. This time, Hinata." Chan shielded Sasuke from his wrath, but he would not allow Hinata to be harmed by the blasted Uchiha again. The threat sent a chill down Sasuke's spine, and Naruto's words were delivered with such absolute certainty that there was no question that he would die at Naruto's hands. Sasuke laughed and kicked over Hinata's lunch, spilling its few contents on the grass, saying, "Yeah right Dobi." He swallowed his fears as his father had told him to. Sasuke insulted him before swaggering away, saying, "Who knows, maybe I'll have my cousins teach you another lesson on where your place is freak." When he left, Hinata released Naruto's hand from his wrist, and he assisted Hinata in cleaning up her lunch before they did the same. However, before they entered, Hinata said, I'm sorry for stopping you but..." Fearing that Naruto would be angry, Hinata started, but Naruto stopped her with another hand. "Don't worry about it Hinata. Chan, you were right." He sounded like an adult making a vow when he said, "Trash like him isn't worth it, but if he ever hurts you again, I will kill him." Hinata gave Naruto a shy look. She was grateful that he was prepared to go to such lengths to protect her, but she was also a little uneasy that he was threatening to kill someone. "Is your cheek okay?" He lowered his voice and then smiled lopsidedly at Hinata, who was looking relieved and nodding. "Do you think you could train with me after school today?" did he ask. Hinata nodded after hesitating, already planning to break up with Ko. After grinning, Naruto took her hand and escorted her back to class. Naruto had been training to outdo his idol for a month, and the progress he had made was unthinkable. No one knew he wasn't a natural, but he was the best prodigy in hundreds of years. Naruto had advanced incredibly in all of the areas he had studied. Remarkably, once he mastered the level he was on, the seals that kept him from reading any farther would disappear. As he continued his studies of Fuinjutsu, he set out to learn how the seal knew when he had mastered the level. He became proficient in the Whirlpool and Cheetah Fist dance styles at both the beginner and expert levels. Naruto assumed that the Whirlpool dance and his Kenjutsu style, the Whirlpool of Blades style, were made by the same people because they were so similar. He practiced the fundamentals until he had made them reflexes rather than instincts. For the first time, he disregarded his instincts, though they still occasionally misled him. Even though the instincts were making it difficult for him to advance in taijutsu, Naruto was still very good at everything else. He became more physically fit as well. Now he could double the original timetable. Naruto was aware that he was healing at an unusual rate due to his Uzumaki ancestry and the Yang chakra of the Kyuubi. Naruto didn't bother limiting his training because his healing was so rapid. Why should he hold back when he knew he would recover? Day after day, he pounded his body into the earth. The Shodai Hokage once said, "There is one thing more frightening than someone who knows their limit. Someone who knows that they don't have one." This statement perfectly captured Naruto's character in that sense. Because Hinata packed his lunches every day, he was gaining muscle. He was no longer a waifish twig, but he was still slender. Although he continued to attend the academy every day, he totally ignored all of the lessons they attempted to impart to him. He only paid attention when Iruka Sensei was lecturing, but he was already familiar with the majority of what Iruka had to say. Hinata-chan was the only reason Naruto bothered to appear. In addition to keeping an eye on the Teme to make sure he didn't try anything, he wanted to keep her company during the dull classes. Sasuke and Naruto didn't have a rivalry because that would indicate that their skill levels were similar. Sasuke was consistently outclassed by Naruto in every way, including accuracy, spars, jutsu, and grades. A certain masked ninja had threatened to kill the teachers if they persisted in trying to undermine Naruto's education. To Sasuke's indignation, Naruto dominated him in every way. Despite his best efforts, Sasuke was unable to locate the two ninja who had previously taught Naruto a lesson. All of the other ninja he had attempted to recruit to complete the task had declined. In addition to being executed, the Hokage had declared that any ninja who physically harmed Naruto would have their names removed from Konohamaru's records and be interred in unmarked graves. The village had been quite agitated by that, but the Hokage's word was law. Naruto would constantly make fun of his fellow student because he knew that Sasuke was looking for more people to torment him. Although Hinata could understand Naruto's motivation, she thought it was petty. Sasuke made an effort to protect his pride in himself, but he was essentially powerless. He had attempted to verbally abuse Hinata to make up for Naruto's superiority in every way, but that had stopped after the first encounter. He had been warned not to offend Hinata-chan by Naruto, who had snapped his arm like a twig. He meant it when he said that he would kill Sasuke and anyone else who stood in his way if he even damaged a single hair on her head. He would spend the remainder of his natural life protecting Hinata because she was the only person he could completely trust. And his unnatural one, too, if he had any say in the matter. Hinata was also helping him develop his chakra control. In the 2 hours that he spent practicing the art each day, she would drop her guard, Teme, and assist him. It turns out that, given the right incentive, she was just as cunning as Naruto. He was proficient in both the tree walking exercise and all of the leaf exercises. In addition to being able to climb walls, Hinata was also developing her chakra control and learning how to walk on water. For about a minute, she could stay shin deep without falling in. It was far more difficult than climbing trees, and she couldn't do it for more than 5 minutes at a time with her 6-year-old reserves. Naruto and Hinata were also compelled to train while on the go. As it happens, Hiyashi had not told Ko about the agreement to have Hinata train Naruto. He relentlessly pursued them in an attempt to spend more time with Naruto. They never trained in the same location twice and never stayed at a clearing for longer than an hour. 4 hours was their record. Naruto was making great progress with his kenjutsu. He was working on expert after completing basic and adept levels with ease. Hinata had graciously declined his offer to teach her the technique. The delicate fist needed to be used with both hands for optimal effect. Hinata was also making progress with her soft fist. In her training, she gained ground and then some. To assist her, Naruto would skip kenjutsu or weapons training every other day. He behaved more or less like a test subject. Hinata would experiment with the stances while he ducked and deflected attacks. She changed some of the stances to flow more like water instead of the rigid ones after Naruto remarked that the typical gentle fist style didn't seem to fit her, saying, "You don't fight like you're all constipated like the rest of your clan." Naruto's training in Fuinjutsu was inexplicable. He devoured everything that had to do with the art. There were no formulas for real seals in the scroll, but he flew through it. To Naruto's dismay, it was more of an introduction, describing the various kinds of seals and their functions. Following the discovery that the scroll had fulfilled its purpose, Naruto started to broaden his understanding of the art in the library by learning about the various kinds of seals, theories, history, and anything else related to the art. But as a civilian, he had limited access to information about Fuinjutsu. He was aware that there were other types of seals, but he lacked the general design and formula to create them. The library's books and the scrolls only discussed the history and users of Fuinjutsu, with a hint of the fundamentals. Thus, Naruto experimented with only the fundamentals, just as the books and scrolls advised against doing in any situation. Through trial and error, he developed the same formulas in an attempt to replicate seals. He was still creating a lot of seals, but the one he was working on the most was a gravity seal that he could use for training. Because of Hinata, he also excelled in ninjutsu. Even with Hinata's assistance, he was struggling greatly with the clone jutsu, despite having mastered henge and kawarimi. He had extremely high chakra levels, she had told him, and even with her assistance, it might not be possible to shape so little chakra. That had demoralized Naruto, but he had ultimately received something better. He had been trying to summon 2 clones as part of his clone jutsu practice. Naruto's instincts began to resurface after he successfully killed 2 of them. When he initially followed them, he was perplexed and ended up with his fingers crossed. Having never seen this hand sign before, he was curious about its potential. Naruto decided to learn and used his hands to channel chakra in order to execute the jutsu. After a puff of smoke, Naruto saw a clone that looked sickly, but it was nothing like the dead ones he had been creating. Naruto was shocked when the clone said, I don't feel too good, boss." Surprised, Naruto said, "You can talk?" Ordinary clones were mute. Was this a sign that this clone was unique? In addition, how did his intuition know how to use this jutsu? Having instincts about how to throw a kunai was one thing, but having instincts that tell you how to do some unknown jutsu that you have never seen before was quite another. His clone's response interrupted his thoughts. "Yeah, I can, but could you dispel me? I feel like I'm about to spew." The feeble-looking clone said, nodding. "How?" Naruto repeatedly demanded, waving his hands in front of him as though that would stop the clone from vomiting, as he appeared somewhat alarmed and didn't want to be vomited on. Suggestively, he blew out his cheeks and exclaimed, "Just give me a pinch." Naruto promptly complied, and after pinching the sickly clone's shoulder, the clone vanished. Then he became aware that he could sense the clone. It was sturdy. He just used what kind of jutsu? As Naruto continued to refine the novel and enigmatic jutsu, he was overcome with excitement. By the time his ninjutsu training ended, he had essentially perfected the art. Using it in large quantities seemed strangely easier to him. He had visited the school and showed Hinata his new method, and she was, to put it mildly, impressed. She was even more impressed when she discovered that she was unable to distinguish between the original and the clones, as she had never heard of solid clones before. It was in due time for Naruto to discover the unique ability of the unidentified jutsu. Naruto's meditation was still coming to a standstill. He was currently traveling to the Hokage Tower because he was still stuck at the first step and felt it was time to go ask Gigi for assistance. When Naruto finally reached the tower, he walked straight past the receptionist who informed him that the Hokage was busy and that he couldn't just walk in. Naruto enters the office and calls out, "Yo, Gigi." From the door, with a number of substantial piles of documents on either side of him, Hiruzen was seated at his desk. Curious as to why Naruto was paying him a surprise visit, he raised an eyebrow. "Hello Naruto-kun, what are you doing here?" Hiruzen said, waving his hand dismissively at the irate receptionist. When Naruto exclaimed, "I need your help with my training. My meditation won't work," Hiruzen's eyebrows shot upwards. He was unaware of how far he had come because he was unaware of the enigmatic scrolls that had entered Naruto's house. Wondering what sort of training Naruto was doing, Hiruzen repeated, "Meditation. Why are you meditating?" he asked. Higher clan shinobi were more likely to meditate than 6-year-old boys who had trouble staying still. This whole time, Naruto believed that Gigi had given him the training, so his brow was furrowed in bewilderment. Naruto yelled, "You gave me that training schedule, but you don't know who did it if Gigi didn't do it." "No. That was not me Naruto-kun. But why don't you tell me what you have been doing for your training?" Hiruzen said, puffing on his pipe. That might provide him with hints about Naruto's trainer. Nodded. "Well, after I got out of the hospital a month ago, I went to my apartment to go grab some training clothes. When I walked in I saw a green scroll on my table and it was full of kicka butt training. I've already mastered the basic and adept levels in everything in the scrolls though, and I've finished the one in Fuinjutsu. Could you get me more scrolls on it? It's my favorite. Anyway, it had stuff full of Fuinjutsu, Kenjutsu, Taijutsu, Jutsus, chakra control, and meditation scrolls and books that I learned from. It also had me doing laps around the village and other exercises, but I've pretty much doubled what it told me to do originally, with pride." Slowly, Hiruzen blinked. It appeared that Naruto had been quite busy ever since their hospital conversation. He was aware that Naruto had been training hard after learning that he had easily broken the arm of Fugaku's second son. He could still recall the commotion that the Uchiha had caused over that. And did he claim that in just 1 month, he had mastered both the fundamental and advanced levels of each of those things? How could that have happened? As Hiruzen considered it further, he came to the conclusion that Naruto was probably exaggerating, demonstrating to him that he was improving even though it wasn't really required. In an attempt to figure out who had trained Naruto, he inquired, "Oh, that certainly is impressive Naruto-kun. What Kenjutsu and Taijutsu styles are you learning?" "I'm learning the cheetah style and the whirlpool dance style for Taijutsu. For Kenjutsu I'm learning whirlpool of blades," Naruto proudly announced. Hiruzen realized then that he would be speaking with a certain masked, silver-haired ninja. He would recognize those as Kushina's Kenjutsu style and Minato's Taijutsu style anywhere. Impressive, Naruto.kun. I'm very proud that you're taking your training seriously. However, could you possibly bring those scrolls to me when you have a chance? I would like to see how far you've progressed. Hiruzen laughed. In order to get Kakashi to talk, he intended to use the scrolls as proof. When it came to topics he didn't want to discuss, he was very obstinate, and the god of shinobi thought this would be one of them. Sure. Naruto pulled the scroll out of his shorts cargo pocket and carried it to Hiruzen. Impressed by the extensive training that covered everything but genjutsu, he opened the scroll and glanced over it. He passed through the seals and directed chakra into them. At this point, he was a little upset with Kakashi. When a child hasn't mastered the fundamentals of ninja arts, who grants them access to the expert levels? Fortunately, he had used one of Minato's seals to block off the master levels. Otherwise, he would have been subjected to an unforgettable lecture. The absence of a seal on the Fuinjutsu and meditation scrolls was acceptable because their main purpose was introduction rather than practice. In an attempt to move past the first step, Naruto said, "Now can you help me out with my meditation?" Of course, Naruto.kun. Now, what is the problem? Can't sit still long enough? Hiruzen nodded. The Hokage joked, to which Naruto rolled his eyes. No. Every time I try to enter my mindscape like the scroll tells me to, I get blocked by this weird white wall. I've tried every day for a month to break through it, but nothing works. Do you know what's wrong, Gigi? Naruto asked with a sense of hopelessness. He would never be able to figure it out if Gigi didn't know how to assist him. Hiruzen scowled. He had no idea why Naruto would have a white wall, but he was certain he knew what he was talking about. The white wall was an anti-interrogation tactic that made it impossible for anyone to get inside the bearer's head and obtain information, since they would be more familiar with the village's secrets than lower-ranked shinobi. The majority of high-ranking ninja and all Anbu had this. With the belief that a gifted Yamanaka could tear down the wall, Hiruzen remarked, "Yes, I do know what it is, but it will be no easy task to break through." Hiruzen was prepared to place a wager that they could repeat their previous success. In addition, the Yamanakas were renowned for their skills in psychiatry and interrogation. They could see how Naruto was handling the situation by checking in with him. He had been unsuccessful in his attempts to persuade Naruto to discuss what had transpired. Perhaps an experienced psychiatrist, interrogator would do better. No matter how difficult it was, Naruto's eye gleamed with determination. He had everything else, and he was going to master meditation and tear down that wall. A blast from the past struck Hiruzen. When Minato would set himself on a course, he would receive the same expression, and neither heaven nor hell could stop him from achieving his objective. The similarities between the two were almost frightening, but Naruto also had a lot of Kushina in him. He appeared to have inherited his parents' best qualities. "I'll set you up with the people who will assist you in tearing down the wall," he said with a smile to the boy. "Are you familiar with the flower shop called Yamanaka's?" Thinking that Inoichi could have come up with a better name for the flower shop his clan owned, he asked. Naruto nodded enthusiastically. "Would you be available tomorrow at around 6 o'clock? Knowing that was Inoichi's free time, Hiruzen inquired. Naruto nodded once more and yelled his gratitude before heading out to inform Hinata of the good news. "Anbu," said Hiruzen as soon as the door closed, and two Anbu appeared in the center of the office as usual. "Fetch me Kakashi," he ordered. The two Anbu members vanished without a sound. Three Anbu members showed up in his office a few minutes later, but Kakashi was dressed in civilian attire, wearing his typical mask, dark blue shinobi pants, and a long, sleeved shirt. "Hello, Hokage. Sama. Did you call?" The specifics weren't that important, but Kakashi was exhausted and eager to get some rest before the Hokage summoned him via Anbu. He had just returned from a month-long mission in Iwa, he said in a drowsy tone. Hiruzen ordered his bodyguards to leave us, and everyone except Kakashi and the Hokage left the room. "You disobeyed a direct order, Kakashi," Hiruzen growled, staring at the unconcerned looking Kakashi. "There are a few things worse than ninja who disobeyed direct orders," Hiruzen said, growing irritated. "Oh, Hokage. Sama, what order would that be?" In an agonizingly phony tone of innocence, he inquired. "I gave you strict orders that under no circumstances were you to have any contact with Naruto Uzumaki," Hiruzen said, growing irritated at Kakashi's rudeness. Being treated disrespectfully by his surrogate grandson was one thing, but being treated disrespectfully by a man who was almost grown was quite another. "Well, I don't recall you giving me that order, Hokage. Sama. You told me never to talk to Naruto, if I remember correctly," Kakashi remarked, grinning. Quietly, Hiruzen cursed Kakashi and his knack for finding flaws in everything. In an attempt to put more pressure on Kakashi, Hiruzen remarked, I would call you leaving a scroll in Naruto's apartment a form of communication, and that's close enough to speaking in my book. Fake surprise caused Kakashi's eyes to widen. Is that where that went? I've searched everywhere for that. Half-heartedly, he exclaimed, not bothering to lie as hard as he usually did. In a sense, Kakashi blamed the Hokage for Naruto's fate, even though he knew it was unhealthy and bad for his career to sass the Hokage. Had he given him custody, Naruto would not have suffered any of those things, and he would have shielded him from those blasted Uchihas, even if it had been his last act. The turn came for Hiruzen to glare at Kakashi, saying in a displeased tone, I find it hard to believe that a shinobi who made Junin at the age of 13 had the sudden urge to master the basics of meditation and fuinjutsu. Well, Kakashi said with a small laugh, I did become a genin at 5. Maybe I wanted to brush up on the basics. According to Naruto, he discovered this in the middle of his table. How did you manage to drop it there, by the way? Gravity is such a fickle thing. I'm not angry that you gave Naruto a training schedule to follow, Hiruzen said loudly as he started to fill his pipe with tobacco. I'm grateful, if nothing else. Naruto wants to be better than his father, and he has a chance thanks to what you gave him. However, I find it intolerable that you heedlessly granted Naruto access to expert-level techniques without ensuring he had mastered the fundamentals. The Hokage changed tactics and threatened, you're lucky that you sealed the master rank, or I would have half a mind to strip you of your rank of Anbu. It was true that he was more worried about Kakashi endangering Naruto with the training than he was about him contacting Naruto. In fact, he expected Kakashi to defy that order years ago. Hiruzen had anticipated seeing alarm, regret, fear, and anger, all of which were far more understandable, but he was surprised by Kakashi's response. Perplexity. Hokage-sama, what are you talking about? Kakashi asked, his eyes narrowed in genuine perplexity. Naruto showed up in my office mere minutes ago and showed me scrolls that only had the master levels sealed off, Hiruzen repeated, genuinely perplexed by Kakashi's perplexed tone. Hiruzen also appeared a little perplexed by Kakashi's peculiar response. No. That can't be possible, Kakashi thought. Hokage-sama, may I see the scrolls? Kakashi ceased his disrespectful tone and asked. Wanting to see where Kakashi was taking this, Hiruzen threw the scroll. This can't be possible. Kakashi denied as he opened the scroll right away and unsealed the scrolls inside, looking at each one, his one visible eye widening with each one. Hiruzen ordered, explain what is going on, Kakashi, who appeared to have seen a ghost. Kakashi said, the thing is, I did seal off everything but the basics, with a tone full of amazement and incredulity. Hiruzen's forehead wrinkled in perplexity. So what happened to them? In an attempt to understand Kakashi's point, he inquired. During the war, Sensei created a seal, which I used. He would use this seal on a training exercise scroll whenever he had a solo mission and we still needed to be trained. We were unable to advance past the level of the exercise we were on due to the seal. We could read the first chapter if we were practicing chakra control, but we couldn't access the second until we had mastered the first level. Naruto's explanation of how far he had come rang like a bell around Hiruzen's skull, and his eyes widened as he realized what Kakashi was saying. Could Naruto really have mastered that much so quickly? Hokage-sama. I left this for Naruto in case you were unable to see through my cunning lie. However, this was meant to go on for a few months, maybe a year, to have learned this much in just 1 month. Kakashi swallowed. Naruto is a true prodigy. He treats Itachi and me like fools. He's already working on tree walking and has mastered the fundamentals and introduction to fuinjutsu, he said, holding up a scroll. Using the Rasengan was one thing, but really learning so much in such a short period of time was quite another, he sobbed. Puffing on his pipe, Hiruzen said, Kakashi. Knowing who the Hokage was attempting to hide Naruto's abilities from, Kakashi nodded in agreement as he said, this never leaves this room. Hi, but what do we tell Otoutu? He will not enjoy having to conceal his abilities. Kakashi said, especially if they make fun of him and he could easily wipe the floor with them. Looking up at Kakashi, Hiruzen nodded in agreement and said, I will talk to Naruto-kun after he returns from the Yamanakas to wear down a mental wall. Did you have anything to do with that? He asked, thinking that could really be the only explanation as to why Naruto had an anti-interrogation wall in his mind. However, Kakashi shook his head, I don't know anything about that. Kakashi nodded and turned to leave the room, but he quickly turned back when he heard a kunai whistle. Hiruzen sighed, if that is all then you are dismissed, Kakashi. Hiruzen simply laughed before throwing him the green training scroll and a blue one as well, saying, "When you're tailing Naruto, be sure not to put those in your pocket." Kakashi turned around just in time for the kunai to miss his leg, but it ripped open his pocket. "I'm working on a small project. I've been attempting to come up with a training schedule that works for both a young Hyuga and an Uzumaki." Hiruzen's fake tone made Kakashi smile. "Of course not Hokage. Sama. I would have given it to them myself, but I wanted this project to be a secret and haven't found the time to deliver it myself," Hiruzen said. "I really didn't need to ruin my favorite pair of pants," he said as he walked out of the room. At 6 the following day, thankful to be able to escape the congested streets, Naruto entered the flower shop with a hint of caution, as he did not see Gigi there. He went up on his tiptoes and rang the bell after approaching the counter and scanning the room for dangers while disguising it as him admiring the numerous flowers. Shortly after, a woman entered the room and asked, "How may I?" She gazed down at Naruto with a hint of disgust. "Assist you? The Hokage told me to be here around 6, she concluded, and Naruto blinked in surprise that she didn't try to grab him by the ear and throw him out like the other store owners did, but he answered as fast as he could, his anxiety rising at the thought of having to speak to someone besides Gigi or Iruka. "Sensei." "A moment please," the woman said, her face still expressionless, and she went back to the back room. A short while later, she returned with a fellow blonde man and a 6-year-old Ino. When Ino saw Naruto, she shriveled in disgust and exclaimed, "What are you doing here, weirdo? Leave," she screamed at a heartless Naruto. Inoichi reprimanded his daughter, saying, "Ino, what did I say about being impolite? Now apologize." He reprimanded Ino. Ino's parents never told her to be mean to Naruto, nor did they ever urge her to be friends with him or anything, but they never told her to despise him either. In any case, Ino was one of Naruto's main bullies, and she adopted everyone else's treatment of Naruto as a way to appear more cool. "I'm sorry," Ino muttered, but judging by the look she was giving Naruto, he doubted that she meant it. In any case, it didn't matter. Ino's opinion of him was meaningless. He only cared about 4 opinions: his own, Gigi's, Iruka, Sensei's, and Hinata's. He didn't care if everyone else fell off a cliff. Inoichi gave Naruto an apologetic smile and said, "I apologize for that. She occasionally loses her manners. We need to keep our appointment, so please follow me." With a kunai tucked in his sleeves, ready to defend himself, Naruto trailed behind him as he made his way to his office, but he was prepared for trouble. Inoichi sat in the chair and offered Naruto the strange-looking couch thing as they entered what appeared to be a room that resembled the stereotypical therapist's office. Naruto lay down, and Inoichi started, "So Naruto, I hear that you've been unable to enter your mindscape because of a white wall." Hiruzen had already given him the lowdown, but he wanted to double-check with Naruto, he summarized. Inoichi nodded, noting how tense Naruto appeared, and Naruto nodded, hoping to finish whatever he was planning to do. "All right, I'm going to have to touch you in order to break through the wall. Is that acceptable?" he asked, observing the startled and suspicious expression that crossed Naruto's face before he nodded, as well as the way that Naruto's left arm tensed before he noticed a strange bulge. He had a sneaking suspicion that the boy was armed, but Inoichi ignored it because, after all, what harm could an untrained child cause? Inoichi extended his hand and touched the boy's head before launching into the boy's head with one of his clan's jutsu. As Inoichi emerged in a vast, white, empty nothing, he looked around in some confusion, realizing that this was more than just a wall preventing Naruto or anyone else from entering his mindscape. It was one of the most sophisticated walls he had ever seen, easily reaching cage level. It was more of a white covering that blocked the view of anything than a wall. What could a child possibly know to justify a wall so sophisticated that it would even prevent the bearer from entering their own mindscape? That raised the question of why Naruto would have such a wall. After giving it some thought, Inoichi asked himself, could it have to do with the Kyuubi? Did the Yondaime put this up to protect Naruto from the demon? This was the most likely scenario. Inoichi then started to question whether he should even attempt to interfere with the wall. If the Yondaime had done so, he must have had a reason, and even if he did, it might take more than a month to take it down. The Hokage had asked him to tear down this wall so that Naruto's training wouldn't be hindered, and he sighed, knowing that it wasn't really his choice in the end. With another sigh, he called out, "Mind Erosion Jutsu," while flying through hand signals, before lowering his hand to the floor. The white floors instantly turned gray, then black, and the longer he held the jutsu up, the more widely the effect spread. This greatly perplexed Inoichi, and although the wall was enormous and denied access to everyone, it was relatively simple to dismantle. Maybe it's a side effect of the seal that keeps the Kyuubi in, or maybe it wasn't meant to last, he thought. Minato used the jutsu once in his life so he wouldn't know all the side effects of the sealing. He began the jutsu with the expectation that he would at most get an inch or two, but he had already gained a few feet. Inoichi had made great strides in eroding the wall, and now instead of seeing only white, you could see the basic outlines of what appeared to be a sewer and milky colors. It was hours before he had finished the jutsu and pulled out of Naruto's mind due to chakra exhaustion. Inoichi had been very concerned about the sewer, if that was the setting. A person's mindscape reflected their perspective on life. For instance, his was a field of flowers, and Ino's was Konoha's park. Both demonstrated extremely positive dispositions and excellent mental health, whereas a sewer had a negative impact on mental health. In actuality, Inoichi had only seen such environments in criminally insane people or shinobi who had been captured by the enemy. In a way, though, he wasn't shocked because Naruto was a victim of the Uchiha and was despised by everyone except a select few, so he shouldn't have been shocked by the gloomy scene. Did it succeed? At first, Naruto thought the man was just playing tricks on him and wasn't doing anything helpful, but a few minutes after he put his hand on his head, it started to tingle wildly, as if his entire head had fallen asleep and was waking up with that sharp pinprick feeling. It felt like ages had passed since the fellow blonde started the strange jutsu on him, but it had stopped now. Yes and no, Inoichi said thoughtfully. The wall has been seriously weakened, but it hasn't fallen entirely yet. Inoichi gave Naruto a slight smile and remarked, it might take 1 or 2 more attempts to completely erode it. Although Naruto's expression remained neutral, he was ecstatic on the inside because he could now finally learn to meditate. Inoichi was a little uneasy about the lack of response, but perhaps now that he was beginning the second part of his mission, he could also find out the answer. Now, Naruto. I am aware that a month ago you were abducted. Would you like to discuss it? Inoichi inquired in a disarming manner that was nearly always effective. But Naruto stiffened. He had heard such tones before, and he always knew trouble was ahead if it wasn't from Jiji or Iruka, sensei. He curtly replied, no, hoping that would put an end to the discussion. I know that you must have been really scared, but it's okay to talk about it, Inoichi said with a sweet smile and his best. You.can.trust.me. Expression. There's no need to feel ashamed because even the most skilled ninjas talk about their fears. Not to mention that I've sworn to secrecy, so nobody will ever find out. Are you kidding me? Naruto asked him. He said, we're done here, as he exposed himself. Look before he hopped off the chair. It always worked with children, so Inoichi blinked in shock, wondering why that wouldn't work. Then he recalled a crucial detail. Naruto wasn't like other kids. He should have been immune to all of his charms by now, or he would have probably gone crazy from all the betrayals he had received. Before he left to deliver the news to the Hokage, he sighed and pinched his nose in frustration, feeling bad for himself for being such a rookie. Alongside Naruto before kicking the door shut, Naruto entered his apartment, which was much cleaner than it had ever been due to Hinata's influence. Because he wanted to impress her and knew that girls disliked mess, he had started cleaning on a regular basis. He yawned loudly as he made his way to his bed. The appointment had taken much longer than he had anticipated, and Naruto was a little irritated that he wouldn't be able to meditate that evening. He had considered staying up late to practice anyhow, but he decided against it because a ninja needed a good night's sleep, so he'd put it off until tomorrow. In addition, Ino's father mentioned that it might take another session to completely remove the wall. As he was walking toward his bed, he caught a glimpse of a new blue scroll and a familiar green one out of the corner of his eye. He was excited to pick up the new blue scroll because he already knew what was in the green one. I've made a training plan for you and Hinata, Naruto. Training materials for your shinobi careers, including weights, training weapons, targets, and books, are contained in the storage seals. Not only would it give me a headache, but the strong should never pick on the weak, so please remember that when you surpass the Yondaime. I hope you know that I am so proud of you for training so hard over the past month. To Hiruzen Sarutobi, sincerely. Naruto grinned broadly when he read Hiruzen's note, as if Jiji had no doubt that he would outshine the Yondaime, and he was very pleased that Jiji had also created a training schedule for Hinata. Jiji's note included instructions on how to unseal the item, but he didn't need them. They had been making it up as they went along, and Naruto felt that he was getting more than she was, which really bothered him. When he expressed his worries to Hinata, she told him that she was pleased with her development, but Naruto still felt that he was exploiting her. If Naruto knew the truth, he would see that she was, in many respects, outperforming him, albeit not in ninja arts. Her confidence had been steadily growing, and she was losing some of her shyness. She was probably going to remain a soft-spoken individual, but she was capable of standing up when necessary. As Hiruzen mentioned, there were weights and other items, but what really caught Naruto's attention was the assortment of books when he opened the scroll further and unlocked some of the seals. A training schedule for Hinata, an introduction to chakra manipulation, which Naruto assumed was for him, and finally, and in his view, the greatest gem of the pile, a book on human anatomy, which he assumed was for Hinata since she would be able to fully master the art because of her Bukagen. A few scrolls about Konohamaru's fabled yellow flash, Minato Namikaze. It was published by Iwa and Kumo to warn their ninja how to best avoid Minato's attacks, but it didn't really matter in the end. Naruto was thrilled to learn more about his idol, mostly about the significant role he had played in the Third Shinobi War, but one article focused on the various jutsus he had created and how he had used them. Naruto was giddy with anticipation. He was going to read these lovely works of literature, so forget about sleeping. Alongside the Hokage and Inoichi was prepared to start his report on Naruto's mental state and the condition of the wall as he stood in the Hokage's office. It has been a long day. You may begin your report, Inoichi-san, Hiruzen said wearily. Hey. Naruto's mental wall was much more sophisticated than I had expected, but it was easily dismantled during my session to destroy it, he started. Oh, if it was so sophisticated, why was it so easily dismantled? Even though he was the god of shinobi and the Hokage, Hiruzen struggled to fully comprehend the concepts of mental jutsu. The first reason I can think of is that the wall was a byproduct of the seal that the Yondaime used, so even though it would keep out Naruto and other inexperienced interrogators, it couldn't keep out a shinobi of a higher caliber. Inoichi appeared to consider this for a few seconds. Another possibility that crossed Inoichi's mind was, or possibly that the Yondaime made the wall so that the Kyuubi couldn't influence Naruto. But due to the fact that he was dying, he could only make a wall that blocked on one side. The second scenario is that the Yondaime put up the wall on purpose so Naruto couldn't have access to the Kyuubi until a certain age, but I just sped up the process, Inoichi explained. A twinge of fear crept into his stomach. Had he simply destroyed the one wall that kept Naruto safe from the demon, or had he just ruined Minato's final act of self-defense for his son? Alongside Naruto, when Naruto decided to put the book down at 2 in the morning, he was starting to get sleepy from reading so much, so he put it on the floor next to his bed, turned off the light, and yawned loudly before turning in for the night. When Naruto opened his eyes, he saw what he believed to be the interior of a sewer. Everything was milky red, and the faint black outline was the only way to identify where things were. Where am I? Did someone throw him in a sewer and he just didn't wake up? Naruto asked himself, dismissing the absurd notion. He was a light sleeper, and the sewer he was in appeared to be a badly drawn sketch. A deep, shaky voice, like a radio losing signal, said, "Come.me." Naruto looked around, but the voice seemed to be coming from everywhere at once. To me, human. Naruto sighed in frustration. Where are you? He shouted in the hopes that the odd voice would inform him. The voice said, "Follow instincts," and Naruto cocked his head in confusion, thinking, "Follow my instincts? Is that what he's trying to say?" Before he started walking, he had no set route, he just followed his feet's instincts. He got lost very easily because everything appeared to be the same, but after several minutes or hours, he started to notice subtle differences in the sewer. He stopped bumping into things because the walls were more colorful and the shadows were darker rather than pale and grayish. Naruto looked at the walls curiously, wondering why they were red and why this sewer didn't smell. Minutes later, all his questions were answered when he entered a spacious room that appeared to be half the size of Konoha, with a cage at the far end that seemed to occupy the entire far wall. He kept walking until he reached the middle of the room, at which point he thought he should stop. "This is the runt that serves as my jailer, huh?" The voice behind the cage said. "I must say, you're much smaller than I had expected." Two enormous red eyes opened and fixed themselves on Naruto. Naruto staggered backwards a couple of paces. "Who are you?" he shouted at the voice's origin, perplexed by the idea of something so large being imprisoned in a sewer beneath Konoha. "Kukuku, you are either very brave or very stupid for speaking in that manner." With a tone that suggested a threat, the Kyuubi said, "I am the Kyuubi no Yoko human, and you will treat me with respect." The white wall that had kept the Kyuubi from influencing his new jailer had been sufficiently eroded for him to be able to reach out, while the Childa, or was he an adulta, looked alike. The Kyuubi had been attempting to contact its third Jinchuriki, but had been unsuccessful until now. Let's get right to the point. Naruto stumbled back onto his posterior as he gazed up at the Kyuubi with a terrified expression. This was the monster that had killed the Yondaime. The communication was shaky at first, but it was much easier now that he was in the same room. Enjoying the terror in the blonde's eyes, the Kyuubi gave Naruto a savage smile. What are you doing here? Why haven't you passed away? What was it doing down here in some sewer?" demanded Naruto, who had been told all his life that his hero had killed the Kyuubi with his last breath. "Huh? Like there's any chance any of you hairless apes could ever kill me," The Kyuubi reluctantly added, "Your leader made a deal with the Shinigami and I was sealed inside of you." He admired the blonde human for being so courageous as to sell his soul to the king of the dead, but he also detested him for robbing him of his freedom once more. For nearly 10 minutes, Naruto remained silent as he tried to process the Kyuubi's words. "What?" he shouted in complete shock. Did it simply say that it was sealed inside him? Naruto had read about Jinchuriki in the library, so he knew it was possible, but he never imagined he was one. He could certainly see parallels between Jinchuriki's treatment of him and his own, but who is to say that they are demons? "I do not enjoy repeating myself, human. You heard me correctly the first time." Naruto lay on his back, muttering denials while his hands covered his face, but the evidence was right in front of him, telling him it was true. In addition, he could recall being called Kyuubi brat more than once, which he had attributed to either the fact that he was born on October 10th or that the Kyuubi was used to damn something or him, in most cases. He whispered into his hands, "You're sealed inside of me," as he gradually recovered from his shock. It would be the most amusement the Kyuubi had seen in years, and he was eager to see the brat's reaction when he finally realized he was a Jinchuriki. Naruto, who rarely cursed but knew how to do so because people frequently cursed at him, said, "That really fucking sucks," as he sat back up. Naruto only used profanity when necessary, and this was definitely one of those times. The Kyuubi gave Naruto a look that was strikingly similar to that of a child who has just been denied a toy that it had desired. The Kyuubi was a little upset that Naruto had not given him any entertainment, but he also admitted that he was handling the news pretty well. He recalled how, much to his amusement, his second jailer had sobbed for hours when she learned that he would be sealed in her. It had been difficult to be discreet enough that she didn't notice, but he couldn't help but laugh when he saw the wimp of a jailer because Mito's seal had given him just enough freedom to be able to feel the world through her senses. With a sullen expression, Naruto gazed at the Kyuubi, imagining how different his life could have been, but he also recognized that if it had, he might not have been friends with Hinata-chan, so as long as Hinata was his friend, he was cool with having a giant freaking demon inside of him. This human could prove to be amusing, the Kyuubi thought, swishing his tails in surprise at the resolve in the boy's eyes that he hadn't seen since the other blonde sealed him. "Don't you despise me?" he asked out of curiosity. He didn't care if Naruto did, but he was wondering why Naruto wasn't screaming, "I hate yous." With a sigh, Naruto said, "Sorta. But I really can't do anything about it," sounding far older than a typical 6-year-old. He got up and said, "Friends?" In an attempt to bring the two together, he asked, but the Kyuubi snarled back. The fox curtly replied, "I do not befriend humans," believing them to be the most vile of all races, incapable of understanding what loyalty meant. Using reasoning that only children could understand, Naruto stated, "And I don't befriend giant foxes that killed my hero. But you're inside me, so I guess we should try to get along." The Kyuubi blinked in surprise, but trust was not readily granted. His previous two jailers had never made an effort to get along with him. Mito had attempted to stifle his hatred, and Kushina had just ignored his presence inside her. Runt, "I don't make friends with people, but I will give you opportunities to do so over time." The Kyuubi squinted at Naruto and said, "This does not mean that I won't take the chance to break out of you if one should ever present itself. I will call you a friend if you can show me that you are different from the rest of your race." After what seemed like a few seconds of deliberation, Naruto said, "Fair enough, Kyuubi. You would think that after 1,000 years, people would be able to come up with something a little more creative than 9-tailed fox." The Kyuubi swished his tail thoughtfully and said, "I have a name," with a hint of annoyance. "What is it?" Ignorant of the Kyuubi's internal conflict over whether or not to reveal his name to Naruto, Naruto inquired. Kurama said menacingly, "It's Kurama," challenging Naruto to chuckle. "You have a weird name, but you got yourself a deal, Kurama," Naruto said, tilting his head to the side. Naruto, "It's not healthy for you to keep what happened to you bottled up. If you truly want to become a successful shinobi, you're going to have to learn to open up a little," Inoichi said with a raspy voice. The task of eliminating the last remnants of the wall was Naruto's third and last appointment. Inoichi was initially concerned that he had unwittingly allowed the Kyuubi to exert influence over the poor boy, but his concerns were unjustified. The Hokage had given Inoichi permission to continue removing the wall because Naruto had not reported any unusual events since it had started to erode. Inoichi was aware that this would be his final opportunity to persuade Naruto to enter this room voluntarily. Although Naruto could be ordered to attend appointments by the Hokage, this did not guarantee that Naruto would follow through on the orders. Naruto was very likely to clam up, even if they were able to get him in the same room. That meant that while the boy was willing to be in the same room as him, This was his last chance to get Naruto to open up. Heck, Inoichi would be content if Naruto told him what his favorite food is at this point. This again. I told you before where you can shove your concerns about my mental health. Plus, ninjas are supposed to be mistrusting ya, idiot, replied Naruto. He was growing increasingly weary of this man's interrogation. Yes, a horrible thing happened to him. He didn't know the right adjectives to describe what had happened, but terrible wasn't even close to describing it. Why he wouldn't just let sleeping dogs lie was beyond Naruto's comprehension. He wanted the past to remain in the past. When Naruto returned, a tick mark appeared on Inoichi's forehead, but he was aware that Naruto had no one to teach him how to be a gentleman like himself or to be polite. Few things irritated Inoichi more than a man who lacked chivalry, as he was renowned for his noble demeanor. Yes, he said, taking a deep breath, ninjas are supposed to be cunning and distrustful, but their lives are harsh, and they must open up to someone or risk becoming insane with guilt or sadness over what they did to defend their village. Inoichi had to persuade Naruto that if he kept everything bottled up, his feelings would eventually resurface with a vengeance. That is what psychiatrists in my clan are for. We help ninjas deal with those messy feelings so it won't affect their duties, Inoichi said in a direct manner. I told you I'm fine, Naruto said with a frown as he stood up, his eyes hardening and his body inadvertently adopting a fighting stance as though he were about to attack Inoichi. Recalling Minato's exact words and adopting the same posture from years ago, Inoichi's eyes widened in surprise. Rewind. Minato, you killed a whole army in a split second. You can't possibly be okay, Inoichi yelled at his companion. Everyone was now aware of the Hiraishin Jutsu's effectiveness after Minato used it for the first time last week, slaughtering an entire army as a yellow phantom, killing Genin, Chunin, and Junin alike with no remorse. Minato was being heralded as a hero. He was already well known from his numerous wartime battles, but his fame grew even more after he used that jutsu. People would wave and smile at him, give him discounts, and sometimes even ask him to marry their daughters. Those had stopped when they sensed the Red Death's wrath. They were all blind to what Inoichi saw, though, seeing through Minato's shy but self-assured public persona to the anger and self-loathing beneath the silly smile and carefree demeanor. Everyone saw Minato's jutsu as being amazing because it required a lot less chakra than other S-ranked jutsu and only caused mild dizziness. However, Inoichi was aware that using the jutsu in the same way as Minato had negative mental effects. Although Minato was not physically harmed by the jutsu, his mental health was suffering as a result. Inoichi didn't think he was really cut out for the shinobi life even though Minato was a kind and protective soul. One of the things that made him so great was that he wore his heart on his sleeve for everyone to see, but it was also the reason that Inoichi believed he should never use Hiraishin in combat again. The fact that Minato was turning into a butcher was too much for him to bear. He killed more than 100 shinobi ninja the first time he used it, and the demand would only increase. By the end of this war, Minato might kill thousands. Inoichi, I told you I was fine. It's not a huge deal. Even though Minato was certain that Kushina already had an idea, he didn't want anyone to know how guilty he felt, so he lied to his friend with ease. The images of him mercilessly mowing down shinobi like grass plagued his sleepless nights. He had killed a great number of them, including Genin. No, Minato, you're not fine, Inoichi said, shaking his head. We both know that you are neither a psychopath nor wholly uninterested in anything, so if you were, you would be either of those things. Minato, you need my assistance. If not, tell Kushina about it. Fearing that a jutsu like this would turn someone like Minato into a cold-blooded killer, Inoichi begged his friend. I told you I'm fine, Inoichi, Minato said, shaking his head. With forced carelessness, Minato remarked, there's no need to keep asking me to open up about something that isn't a problem. Minato, you need. Inoichi shook his head once more. He had unintentionally turned his body to the side, which was the stance he used when he was about to attack someone, and Minato's rage that Inoichi wouldn't let the matter drop finally showed when he snapped, "Drop it, Inoichi." Inoichi could count on one hand how many times he'd seen Minato look this angry and still have a few fingers left, and his eyes widened when Minato of all people snapped at him. Minato rubbed the back of his head and laughed awkwardly after a few tense seconds. I apologize. I didn't get much sleep last night, so I'm a little grumpy. He mentally chastised himself for becoming enraged and apologized. Minato took advantage of Inoichi's stupid nod and said, well, I have to go meet Obito and Rin for training, so see ya, Inoichi. As he disappeared in a flash of yellow, he said. Flashback end. Inoichi blinked several times, erasing the memories of his friend who had passed away, Nar. He began, preparing to inform Naruto that it was unhealthy to hold everything inside yet again, but Naruto had chosen to depart while Inoichi was preoccupied. That tiny. Inoichi growled underneath his breath as he sprinted towards the door. Inoichi ran into the flower shop just in time to see Naruto walking out the door. Naruto! He shouted, and the boy sighed in frustration, his shoulders dropping. I won't tell you what took place. Move on. Without even looking back, Naruto uttered those words. After a moment of hesitation, Inoichi said, all right, you don't have to talk about what transpired in the room, but at least talk about something. It makes no difference how tiny. Inoichi begged, attempting to make amends for his errors with Minato. Inoichi questioned how Naruto was able to sigh like a tired adult. Flashback. Content warning. Graphic. Please don't force me inside. In sheer terror, Naruto let out a scream. You monster! Get in the cage! One of the Chunin shouted, then kicked Naruto viciously in the ribs, causing him to lose his hold on the entrance's edge. Please! Please stop hurting me! Naruto begged them to stop, his eyes welling with tears. Stop talking, you monster! When I'm giving you enough electricity to make Lighting jealous, let's see how many screams I can get out of you. Lighting started to crackle out of his fingers as he spoke. Flashback end. As memories surfaced, Naruto gazed out the doorway with a 1,000-yard stare. He said flatly, I hate cages, and then he left Inoichi looking worried. It was a few minutes past 3, and Naruto was on his way to the academy to see Hinata, ignoring the hateful glares that were directed at him as he walked through the crowded streets. One of the teachers had expelled him for not paying attention, and this time, the teacher's excuse was somewhat justified because Naruto had been snoring loudly at his desk. Everyone was being taken home by their parents or guardians when he arrived at the academy, and Naruto was a little sad that he had no one to go home to or with, but that all vanished when he saw Teme escorting Hinata-chan home, who was keeping a close watch on Hinata because she had been escaping from him every day. He didn't hate or even dislike Naruto, but he didn't think Naruto was worthy to be around the Hyuga heiress, and he was starting to get paranoid around her. It seemed like the minute he looked away from her, she would vanish to go train with the Naruto, and he would never understand why young Hinata loved being around him so much. When Hinata had discovered her playing with a 4-year-old Naruto, he had reprimanded her and told her never to associate with him again, but she had not listened. That was before anyone thought she was a failure. He makes me really happy, Hinata had said. She started to seek out Naruto's company more frequently as it became clear that she lacked the talent for her clan's style, and he had seen her sneaking and following Naruto around several times. At first, he had been horrified by her stalker-like behavior, but he soon realized why she did it. Because of the rigorous training, Hinata didn't feel safe at home, but she did feel safe around Naruto, so she followed him around. When he opened his eyes again and saw that he was alone, let out a loud sigh and rubbed his eyes with the palms of his hands before saying, Hinata-sama, you really need to stop running off. Damn it. With a broad smile on his face, Naruto guided Hinata through a network of alleyways, saying, that was so simple. Hinata grinned and nodded in agreement as he said this to his friend. Normally, she would need to use Naruto's pranking materials to divert attention, but this time they took advantage of the situation and fled together while Teme was preoccupied. With Hinata by his side, Naruto walked out into the markets after peeking out the end of the alley and seeing no sign of So, what do you want to do today, Hinata-chan? He threw his hands behind his head and asked, could we work on chakra E exercises? Hinata blushed a little when he smiled at her. She wasn't sure why, but she always did when Naruto smiled. She asked. Although she no longer stammered as much, she still did it when she felt ashamed. That sounds like a plan, Naruto said, nodding. How about we visit the training area we observed with those Anbu men? We have not yet visited that location. Hinata hesitated for a second, not wanting to risk disappointing Naruto, but also not thinking it was a very smart idea to train on an Anbu training ground. Yeah. As she took the initiative, she lied and said, that sounds good. As they made their way through the bustling market, Naruto began to regress a bit. He was getting his typical glares, and although he didn't care what the village thought of him, he didn't want to ruin Hinata's reputation. In addition to the Tame's attempts to mistreat her, Naruto slapped him hard every time, and naturally, all of his fangirls did the same. Teachers began to ignore her, and children stopped playing with her whenever Naruto wasn't around. In an attempt to keep people from noticing that they were together and prevent further harm to Hinata's reputation, Naruto hung back a few steps because he felt terrible that she was being mistreated because of him. Naruto was startled out of his reverie when he felt a hand grab hold of his, and his eyes widened at the unexpected touch. If you fall any more behind, you circa could get lost, Hinata said with a smile, a little taken aback by her own audacity. "Thanks," Naruto grinned back. As he let Hinata guide him to the training field, he said. Using only his chakra to stay attached, Naruto hung off the bottom of a branch. "I made it to the top at last." His words were directed at Hinata, who was fighting to keep her head above the water she was standing in. However, she lost focus and was thrown into the water when she tried to look up to congratulate her friend. Naruto jumped down to check on her, but by the time he reached her, she had already left the water. "You're all right, Hinata-chan?" As he assisted her in wiping away the extra water, Naruto said, I'm fine, Naruto-kun." Hinata nodded. "And don't worry," she said, smiling reassuringly at Naruto. She knew she wasn't strong enough to defend herself, but that wasn't the point. She didn't fully understand why Naruto was sometimes like a mother hen to her, but she did understand that he didn't have a family or anything except the Hokage and Iruka Sensei, whom he rarely saw, so she kind of understood why he would act overprotective of her. For example, he broke Sasuke's arm when he called her a pale-eyed freak, protecting the only person he considered family. Naruto sighed with relief, saying, "That's good." Knowing that he was the cause of her fall into the lake, Naruto apologized for disturbing her focus. Naruto stood watch for Ko-teme as Hinata finished wringing herself dry. They had decided to take the chance of remaining in one place for a few hours after they had begun training, as there weren't many locations with ponds that they hadn't already visited. Fire release. Jutsu with phoenix flowers. Water release. Water shockwave exploding. Two ninja, both in Anbu armor and engaged in combat, screamed as they came into the clearing. When he saw the pond rise up and crash over them, overpowering the fire jutsu, Naruto grabbed Hinata and used his body as a shield, holding onto her to keep her from being swept away while feeling the water slam down on his back, cracking a few ribs in the process. Both of them were swept away by the strong current in the direction of the two Anbu ninjas, who were unaware of the children's presence. The two Anbu used two more water jutsu. Naruto was still submerged and was unable to catch their names, and the disturbance caused the still submerged children to alter their course. Even though Naruto had no idea where they were going, he knew that he and Hinata needed air because his lungs were burning and screaming for oxygen, and he could only imagine that Hinata was in worse shape because she hadn't had time to take a deep breath like Naruto had because she hadn't been able to see the enormous wave coming because her back was turned. Ignoring the seawater stinging his eyes, Naruto opened his eyes underwater and tried to get a sense of direction. He was fortunate to open his eyes at that precise moment because he saw the tree that was rapidly approaching. Naruto would have been fine, but the current had him moving pretty quickly, and when you added the fact that he had nearly a ton of water adding pressure, it was understandable when his legs fractured in multiple places. He focused chakra to his feet, flipped underwater, and struck the tree with his feet. Naruto hissed in pain as he landed on his back, Hinata falling on top of him not helping at all, and he was certain that a rib or two had given out. He forced back a grunt of pain as he landed, which would only waste air and time. He held himself in place until the torrent of water subsided and collapsed to the ground when it finally did. As she crawled away from Naruto, who was gasping for air and hissing in agony each time he did so, Hinata started to cough violently. Dot are you? Cough cough. Alright and Naruto-kun. Observing that he was gripping his right shin and ribs, she inquired. With a feeble nod, Naruto said, "Yes, I will be alright." "How are you, Hinata-chan?" "We yes. Should tell those Ninja that we're here," he said, forcing himself to stand up, his attention on Hinata, who nodded that she was okay, but he was dimly aware of the two Anbu ninjas still engaged in combat somewhere off to the side. She reasoned, "So we can leave before we get more hurt," but Naruto appeared unsure, thinking that it would probably be safer to climb up the tree and wait them out. However, before he could say anything, Hinata stood up and began to move in the direction of the fighting. Hinata eeped loudly as the two ninjas appeared, which was a very big mistake, but she didn't have to walk far because they were engaged in a fierce taijutsu match. Going all out gave them the feel of being in a war zone, and since they were Anbu, Konoha's first line of defense and offense, the experience was invaluable. Anbu spars were completely different from regular spars in that they aimed to kill or maim their sparring partner rather than just injure them. This way, they would get the most out of their training. However, they were both running on battle instincts because they were fully engaged in the battle. They were seasoned and experienced in ambushes, so when they heard a sound that wasn't typical in a forest, they responded appropriately because they were meant to be totally alone. Knowing that they had aired the instant the weapons left their grasp, both of them fired kunai at the source of the eep, but it was too late to reverse the situation. All they could do was watch in horror as their weapons sped toward a young girl. Time seemed to slow down as Hinata watched her impending doom race towards her as the kunai approached her, one aiming for her eye and the other at her heart. The last time she had a near-death experience, she had been too preoccupied with Naruto to be afraid. Her concern for Naruto was more important than her own life. This time was completely different. She was terrified this time, but she didn't want to die yet because she was still too young and had a lot of things she wanted to do, like be a big sister to Hanabi, remove the evil seal from the Branch family, continue to impress her father with her progress, and show those mean elders. However, she would not be able to do any of those things because her life was about to end. Hinata closed her eyes in a final act of terror, hoping to avoid witnessing the moment her life ended, but moments went by and she didn't die. In a daze, she opened her eyes, wondering if the kunai had missed her or if she had already passed away and was now only a ghost. She opened her eyes and saw her response. Two sapphire arms of pure chakra held two kunai hovering just an inch from her heart and eye. Surprised, Hinata staggered back and landed on her butt, looking behind her to see where the strange arms had come from. She saw Naruto's hand extended, and when his arms were too short to stop the kunai, a second arm of chakra extended from it. Naruto, who had attempted to get up and run over to intercept them but was unable to do so due to multiple fractures in his legs, watched in horror as the two Anbu threw kunai at Hinata on reflex. His prayers were answered when arms of chakra exploded from his palm, stopping the two kunai just in time. He had thrown out his hand in a futile attempt to stop the kunai with anything that would save his friend, but he had no idea how he used these strange chakra arms. Naruto, who had no idea what that jutsu was exhausted and slumped over as the arms started to dissipate, dropping the weapons to the ground. "Why are you two in this place? You might have died." It dawned on her that she had almost killed the future clan head of one of the most respectable clans in Konoha, said the female Anbu wearing a cat mask. She recognized the Hyuga heiress, of course, and Naruto because she occasionally protected him when Kakashi or Itachi were unavailable. She swallowed as she considered how much hell she would face if it weren't for Naruto's peculiar jutsu. "I apologize, Anbu-san." The fear from her near-death experience caused Hinata to stutter a little again as she said, W. We were training and we couldn't get away when the fighting started. "Hey kid, tell me about the jutsu you employed. Is it a Kekkei Genkai that he was unaware of?" inquired the Anbu wearing a boar mask, who had never seen a jutsu like that before. Puzzled, Naruto glanced down at his hand and said candidly, "I don't know." "Are you two okay?" the cat Anbu asked, glancing at the two kids. She inquired. Hinata appeared to be acting normally, but Naruto was gripping his ribs. Naruto nodded and said, "I'll be fine," which was remarkably composed for a 6-year-old with broken ribsa, though he did have an exceptionally high pain threshold. Before putting her hands on Hinata's shoulders and bore on Naruto's as they both shinned, she nodded and said, "We're taking you to the Hokage," in a formal tone. Suppressing a yawn, Itachi entered the gates of his clan. He and Kakashi had been on a mission to Kiri and were only now returning after a little more than a week away. Among the many small gestures that distinguished Itachi from the rest of his clan, he returned the nods he received from the two guards at the gates. He was aware that they weren't Kami's gift to the world, and he didn't consider himself superior to anyone just because he was a prodigy. On the contrary, he would become irritated when others would boast about his fighting skills. Although his clan would not accept it, he put a lot of effort into honing his shinobi skills despite his obvious talent. He was furious that they used him as evidence that the Uchihas were superior to everyone else, and he tried to convince his family that his unique eyes did not make him great. He claimed that Kakashi had outshone him in terms of talent, proving that you weren't great because of your blood. Kakashi had become a genin at age 5, a chunin at age 8, a junin at age 12, and an anbu at age 13. Eager to take a nap and enjoy some of his mother's cooking, Itachi sighed as he made his way home, only to discover Sasuke practicing the interceptor fist with a broken arm. Although he was aware that Naruto had broken his stupid little brother's arm, he didn't hold it against Naruto because he was aware that Sasuke had teased Hinata and that Naruto was fiercely protective of the young Hyuga. However, Kakashi had been boasting about his younger brother defeating Itachi's younger brother throughout the journey, so perhaps he harbored some resentment toward Naruto. Sasuke turned around in shock as Itachi said, "Hello Sasuke," shocking his younger brother. "Itachi?" Before putting his arm around his big brother's leg, he joyfully exclaimed. Itachi smiled down at Sasuke, and in such moments, Itachi could imagine what kind of boy Sasuke could be, free of clan pride. Sasuke had twice the arrogance of the typical Uchiha and occasionally appeared to act like a psychopath, but he wasn't a psychopath. He was just doing as his father had instructed, reminding everyone of their position beneath the Uchiha. Itachi would not tolerate it, so his father seemed to double Sasuke's arrogance. Even though Sasuke had rejected his repeated attempts to persuade his younger brother that his father's teachings were incorrect, Itachi remained committed to the admirable objective. "How does your arm feel right now?" "It's okay now," he said, suppressing a smile at Sasuke's furious expression. "When I'm feeling better, I'm going to give that jerk a lesson." Sasuke spoke bravely, as if he were performing a great and honorable deed. With a slight frown, Itachi said, "Oh, how can you prevent him from breaking your arm once more?" Since Sasuke had been the Rookie of the Year for most of his first year in the academy, he reasoned that this was the best chance to help him shake off his conceit. Every year, there was a Rookie of the Year and a dead last. Sasuke continued to be the class leader. Naruto was the dead last for the majority of the year. While he was improving in all the physical aspects of being a shinobi, he was receiving straight zeros in all academic subjects until recently. Although he was now receiving much better grades, he wouldn't be able to raise his grade to the point where he would be tied with next to last even if he made hundreds in everything. Given that Sasuke had just been beaten twice by the dead, Itachi hoped he might be able to persuade his brother of the truth. He cheated. Sasuke flushed. Itachi smiled knowingly at Sasuke as he lied. "Is that correct?" Itachi informed Sasuke that he was aware of the younger Uchiha's deceit by saying, "That's not what I heard. You shoved Naruto when he told you to stop bullying young Hinata, according to what I've heard. After Naruto failed to push back, you kicked dirt in his eyes and shoved him once more before attempting to do the same to Hinata while cursing her. Naruto took hold of your arm at that point and urged you to apologize. Naruto gave you another chance even though you declined. Naruto broke your arm when you refused once more." Itachi concluded with disappointment, lamenting the cruelty of his younger brother. "To me, it sounds like Naruto didn't cheat at all. If anything, you cheated when you kicked dirt in his eyes," he said. When Sasuke was unable to come up with an excuse, he declared, "That doesn't matter. The next time will be different." Itachi gave a headshake. Itachi said gravely, "No, it won't. The next time you try to fight Naruto, the same thing, if not worse, will happen. Do you know why?" Sasuke appeared a little alarmed by his brother's tone. He couldn't say that he liked it because he had never heard Itachi talk to him in this way. "No," he replied. In a matter of fact tone, Itachi explained, "You will lose every time you go against Naruto simply because he trains harder than you." In denial, Sasuke shook his head. Breaking out of his fear of Itachi's tone, Sasuke argued, "But I'm a Uchiha. He's an orphan. No matter how hard he trains, I'll always be stronger. You will lose to Naruto every time you fight him because, contrary to what father has said, being a Uchiha does not make you strong. Sure, you may be more talented than Naruto in some areas, but talent can only get you so far," Itachi said, shaking his head. "Did being a Uchiha stop Naruto from breaking your arm with ease? With absolute certainty, I can state that Naruto trains more than half of the ninja in this village, including some Junin. Because of this, hard work always yields greater results than talent, regardless of whose blood you have in you," Itachi concluded, feeling a little exhausted from the unusually lengthy speech. Sasuke appeared to consider what his big brother had said. He looked up to him more than anyone else, and the reason he had always rejected his brother's beliefs was because he had never seen any proof. Itachi claimed that his prodigy status was the reason he was so strong, but how was that evidence that his father's beliefs were incorrect? Itachi was a Uchiha, and he was strong. He didn't believe him when Itachi told him about a man named Kakashi who was stronger. According to what he had heard, Kakashi had a Sharingan eye, so he assumed that possessing the Uchiha's unique eyes made one strong. He could still feel the pain of his broken arm, which was the only reason he was even thinking about it now. He was baffled by how an orphan, a Uchiha, had defeated him, but now Itachi was explaining. Itachi suppressed another smile when he noticed that Sasuke was considering what he had said, pleased that he wasn't dismissing him as he had done in the past. He wasn't sure if Sasuke would pay attention, but at least he was considering it. Turning to face the house, he said, "Come on. Let's go see if mother has anything to eat," with Sasuke at his heels. Alongside Naruto, his assistant was startled when Naruto, Hinata, and the two Anbu appeared in front of the Hokage's office. "Hello Anbu. Sans, huh?" she said, "If you want to talk to the Hokage, he's free right now." Kat nodded, indicating that she had heard, and then went to knock on the door, but Naruto flung open the doors before she could do so. "Hey, Gigi." Few people, including Bor, had the audacity to refer to the god of shinobi as an old man. "Some cool Anbu brought us here to see you," Naruto said, making Bor ponder the size of the balls this kid possessed. Hiruzen was reading a mission report when he looked up to see Naruto storming into his office, looking like a demon. Ah, Naruto. What specifically has brought you here, my Anbu? You avoided trouble once more, didn't you? He inquired. Naruto had to deal with paperwork whenever he got into trouble. The cat Anbu responded, we found these two on training ground 12, Hokage. Sama, after Naruto flashed his surrogate grandfather a lopsided smile. These two were almost killed during a sparring match between Bor and me. Naruto. What were you doing on an Anbu training ground? Hiruzen asked, taking a deep breath and focusing on a shy, looking Naruto. He inquired. Hinata. Shan and I were training Gigi, Naruto said, rolling his eyes. If you couldn't figure that out, you might be going say.sen.il. In Naruto didn't he know what senile meant, but he was certain it referred to elderly people. There was only one reason why Naruto was behaving like his former self. Hinata was present. When she was around, he never experienced panic attacks or anxiety problems, but when she wasn't, it was rather awful. What a brazen child. Naruto.kun, you ought to respect the Hokage more. Kami, tell me how this brat puts on pants. How exactly did you find the training field? Hiruzen sighed loudly. He questioned, they're very well hidden, wondering if he should move some of the training fields in case a child discovered them. Then he recalled that Naruto was different from other kids and that he needed to speak with the boy. I'm not sure. As Hinata and I were fleeing Teme, we came upon a lake with some Anbu nearby. Since it was an Anbu training field and we had never been there before, I reasoned that Teme would have a hard time locating us, Naruto explained. You said that they almost died, explain how that happened, Hiruzen said, nodding, aware of the agreement between Hinata and her father. He turned to face the cat. As Cat began to describe Naruto's strange new ability, Hiruzen's pipe almost fell out of his mouth as she described how she and Bor had been involved in a fierce sparring match and how Naruto and Hinata had been caught up in it. Unexpectedly, Naruto appeared to have inherited Kushina's ability, or at least a variant of it, as he was aware that Kushina's ability had been a peculiarity in her clan, with no one having ever seen anything like it and no one understanding why she possessed the strange yet potent ability, which had ultimately led to her being selected as the next Jinchuriki for the Kyuubi. Naruto, is there any way you could demonstrate that method for me? He inquired, curious to find out if it was true. After a few minutes without any results, Naruto nodded and concentrated on his hand, trying to sense what had prompted him to use the technique again. Unlike before, Naruto's hand was shaking, deformed, and completely unstable, and it took all of his focus to keep the hand from collapsing. Suddenly, a blue hand made entirely of chakra appeared out of Naruto's hand. After marveling at the method that had saved her life, Hinata turned to face Naruto, realizing that he had saved not just her life but also her dreams, and she intended to take full advantage of the second opportunity he had given her to realize them when he stopped those kunai. Hiruzen, who smoked his pipe in wonder, was certain that Naruto would grow up to be a formidable shinobi. A look of disappointment crossed Naruto's face as he eased the use of the jutsu. The technique had been more solid and less shaky the first time, and he was unable to think of a reason why it was so difficult now. But the adults in the room all knew. Naruto was one of the few individuals in the world who would constantly get stronger during a battle. They would use their environment to their advantage and think of intricate strategies on the spur of the moment, without even realizing how complicated they were. Naidame, Minato, and now Naruto were the only individuals Hiruzen had encountered who fit that description. He was extremely happy that Naruto was in that category, but he was also afraid for the village because he knew that no one could stop him if he ever decided to take revenge on the village for how he was treated as he grew older. Naruto's potential was practically boundless because of his battle instincts, talent, and chakra capacity. My amazing work, Naruto.kun. Although there was a possibility that Naruto would turn on the village, Hiruzen knew that would never happen because Naruto was naturally forgiving and kind. Hearted enough to be reluctant to harm a flyer, that is, unless Hinata was in danger. When the Hokage said, Naruto grinned and said, thanks, Gigi. He forgot his earlier disappointment completely. The Hokage turned to the two Anbu and nodded, saying, even though I'm not happy with the situation, I've needed to speak to you, Naruto. Can you two make sure Hinata gets home safely? He got two nods when he asked. They all said, hi Hokage. Sama, before escorting Hinata out the door. Hinata separated from the Anbu to embrace Naruto before they left. Thank you for saving me, Naruto.kun, she said, crushing Naruto, who was fortunate to have had his ribs more or less repaired during the conversation. Because the white wall had been eroded, Naruto not only had access to the Kyuubi and its chakra, but it also appeared that his healing ability had been enhanced. Naruto grinned and vowed, you don't have to thank me, I'll always protect you, Hinata-chan. The tender display nearly made Kat's inner woman come out, but years of Anbu training prevailed, so she called it a day. Hinata-san, we should hurry, she said. Your dad will want to know how you're doing, she stated firmly. After nodding, Hinata waved goodbye to Naruto. Naruto turned to face the Hokage and asked, Gigi, what would you like to discuss? He asked in a tone that was less animated than the one he had been using moments before. He was not going to have a panic attack because he trusted the old Hokage more than enough to stop the attacks, but he still felt uneasy because a lot of his arrogant confidence went with Hinata when she left. Seeing this, Hiruzen decided to say nothing. Well, Naruto-kun, I would like to talk about the progress you've made in recent months, he said, knowing that Naruto wouldn't agree with what he had to say but that it was necessary. Gigi sounded serious, and Naruto's heart skipped a beat. Was he not performing up to par? If so, why had Gigi been pleased with his previous progress? Was Gigi deceiving him? Hiruzen immediately put his concerns aside after noticing Naruto's terrified expression. I'm still thrilled with your progress, Naruto-kun. Naruto was not going to like this, but the Hokage said sadly, there is something that must be done that you're not going to like. Anxiety began to creep up on Naruto. Gigi, what must be done? With a meek tone, Naruto asked, considering all the negative things Gigi might say next. With a sigh, the Hokage said, Naruto-kun. I'm afraid you have to retain the dead last position for the academy, in response to the expected response. Why? Why must I be the last to die? I gave Sasuke a beating. Next year, I could win Rookie of the Year. This wasn't what Naruto had anticipated, and although he was somewhat relieved that it wasn't one of his fantasies, he was still not happy about it. Hiruzen exhaled. I know it is incredibly unfair and I have no doubt that you could be the Rookie of the Year, but it is simply too dangerous for you to do so. Although he fervently wanted Naruto to win Rookie of the Year, the threat posed by Danzo far outweighed the desire for Naruto to be able to slap the brats who tormented him. Danzo had been Hiruzen's nemesis for too long. He had once referred to the man as his best friend and greatest rival, but those days were long gone, and now he had nothing but disdain for him. His root program was the only reason he hadn't had him killed. He permitted Danzo and his program because they were beneficial to the village. Yes, he had to ignore the fact that they had technically committed treason a few times, but only because he was convinced that Danzo had Konoha's best interests at heart and was prepared to go to any lengths to protect it. However, if Danzo was aware of Naruto's potential for power, he would do whatever it took to turn the boy into a weapon. If he was aware of Naruto's talent, he would undoubtedly attempt to kidnap Naruto and use him as a tool against Hiruzen's orders, which was something that could not be permitted. Not only would Hiruzen lose a devoted ninja, but he would also lose the program that dealt with the messier jobs that Konoha didn't want associated with them, and there was the possibility that Root might rebel or join an enemy village. Hiruzen knew that he couldn't ignore that and that he would have to execute his one-time friend. For Naruto to receive that level of attention was just too risky. You mean that it's too risky? Naruto made a demand. There is a remote possibility that what transpired with the Uchihas could occur once more if you win Rookie of the Year. It is unlikely because I have raised your defenses, but knowing that Naruto-kun had no chance at all would help me sleep better at night, Hiruzen replied. My strength is increasing. I am able to defend myself, Naruto argued obstinately. Yes, Naruto-kun. You are becoming strong, but you're not strong enough to defend yourself as well as Hinata, Hiruzen said, nodding, trying to persuade the boy by appealing to Naruto's intense protective instincts, even though he knew that Naruto couldn't care less about what happened to him. Naruto went pale at that point. Was it possible that Hinata was injured because he was the Rookie of the Year? Can't you get those Anbu guys to protect Hinata? Chan? In an attempt to combine the best aspects of both worlds, he asked. Yes, I can, Hiruzen said, puffing on his pipe, but there's a chance that someone might manage to get through. Similar to what occurred to you a little more than a month prior. When those Uchiha took you, you had Anbu protecting you, Hiruzen remarked, knowing he was delivering a slight, but it was safer and better for the boy to be the last to die. The idea of those terrible things happening to Hinata made Naruto feel like he was about to pass out, and he had to make sure that didn't happen. Naruto nodded, indicating that he understood and that, despite his dislike, he would do it in order to keep Hinata-chan safe. Hiruzen, who could almost feel the disappointment radiating from Naruto, said sadly, I am sorry Naruto-kun, but this is the safest option for you and young Hinata. Alright, Gigi. It's worth it because Hinata-chan will be protected. See you later, Naruto remarked before heading out. The following day, remembering the loud snaps of Naruto's ribs when he had broken her fall, Hinata was carrying a homemade medical cream to Naruto's house. She knew he didn't need it, but she had to do something because he had saved her life. It wasn't often that you see a real princess strolling through the most shabby part of Konoha, so she bravely walked through the red light district, where Naruto lived, ignoring the curious glances from the few people on the streets. Hoping it was early enough that he hadn't left yet, Hinata ascended the stairs of Naruto's apartment complex and knocked on the door. After a few knocks, she heard a loud, "I'm coming," prior to the door opening and revealing Naruto in his training attire. "Hinata-chan, why are you here at such an early hour?" As he welcomed her into his modest house, he asked. She exclaimed, "I made you an ointment F. For your ribs," and quickly pushed out the tiny vial. With a startled blink, Naruto accepted the vial. "Thank you, Hinata-chan." After putting the gift in his pocket, Naruto exclaimed with joy. She paused and patted her stomach, saying, "I know you don't need it because of the... but I wanted to thank you for saving me," she said, blushing slightly as she recalled how Naruto had bravely broken her fall and then saved her life. Hinata had taken the news very well, and Naruto grinned when she mentioned his tenet. Rewind. Naruto said hesitantly, "Hey Hinata. I need to tell you something," because he was so afraid that the information he was going to divulge would cause their friendship to fall apart. "Is it Naruto-kun? What?" After avoiding Teme once more, she asked, breathing heavily. With a heavy swallow, Naruto said, I. You know the Kyuubi?" Uncertain of how to break the news that he had a flippin' demon sealed in him, Naruto began. Hinata appeared perplexed. "Yeah." Wondering what the Kyuubi had to do with what Naruto had told her, she replied, "The Yondaime killed it when it attacked Konoha." Taking a deep breath, Naruto said, "What if I told you that it wasn't dead?" Naruto hesitated before answering, but Hinata-chan deserved to know even though he really didn't want to. "AWW. What do you mean Naruto-kun? That thing was still alive? They were all in danger?" Hinata's eyes widened in terror. Her father had told her stories about the giant fox and how it almost destroyed the village. "Does the Kyuubi still exist?" she stutteringly asked in fear, her stutter getting worse. Slowly nodding, Naruto concluded, the Yondaime couldn't kill him but he could seal it in something. Or someone, anticipating the response of his one and only friend. Though young, Hinata was not a fool, and her eyes widened even more as she understood what Naruto was saying. "He sealed it inside you." Hinata wanted to make it clear that her guess was correct, so she asked in a tone that was almost incredulous. "I just found out last night, but I get it if you don't want to be friends anymore," Naruto said sadly, pulling down his shirt without making eye contact with Hinata, and she let out a little distressed cry when he showed her the seal on his stomach. "How is he able to fit inside your stomach?" Hinata inquired. Her only question was, "How did a giant fox fit inside of me?" Naruto's head snapped up, and then he understood Hinata's intention. She was communicating to him that she still considered him a friend and didn't care that he was a Jinchuriki. "No idea." Naruto smiled at her. Flashback concludes. "You don't need to express gratitude because I'll always keep you safe." The young Hyuga blushed as he grinned and vowed. Hinata also pledged, "And I'll do my best to protect you Naruto-kun." Naruto smiled and said, "Want to train with me since you're already here? Try to keep up," he said, and Hinata nodded enthusiastically. He hurried out the door after saying this. Later on in the day, Hinata stumbled down the stairs to join Naruto for lunch, feeling like after his morning workout, and she hadn't even done a third of what Naruto did. She couldn't understand why he was waving his arm enthusiastically at her rather than lying on the ground groaning in agony. "Before someone else takes our place, Hinata-chan, hurry up," he spoke without showing any signs of fatigue. Hinata nodded and made herself move a bit more quickly. After several minutes, Hinata finally descended the stairs and was outside by the swing, but there was an unpleasant sight at the tree. "Teme, what are you doing here? Do you want me to break your other arm?" Naruto, who couldn't stand Sasuke, a ringleader who caused all of his followers to shun Hinata-chan after they became friends, growled and stepped forward menacingly. "I'm sorry," Sasuke growled, using a word that was nearly alien to him. He was trying to follow Itachi's teachings, even though he wasn't happy that he was apologizing to two commoners. Sasuke frowned and was about to respond, but he stopped himself after remembering why he was there. Both Naruto and Hinata blinked in shock, clearly not anticipating that. Naruto was the first to recover from his shock. "Sorry for what, Teme?" Never having the slightest faith in Sasuke, he demanded. "I'm sorry for being mean," Sasuke nearly spat out, as if the words were hurting him, and he rolled his eyes. Hinata gave Sasuke a startled look and said, "We accept your apology," glaring at Naruto to stop him from arguing. Naruto turned back to Sasuke after noticing the expression. "All right." He lied and said, "We forgive you." He could never forgive someone who had the authority to order the things that were done to him. With a nod, Sasuke began to leave. Wait, are you interested in becoming friends? Hinata inquired, believing that they could now be friends if Sasuke had expressed regret. No, I don't want to be friends with you, Sasuke said, trying desperately not to sneer at the offer of friendship. Why would he want to be friends with the two misfits in their class? Sasuke more or less snapped at Hinata, saying, I'll just try not to be so mean. However, he quickly fled when Naruto took a few steps toward him, fully intending to snap his other arm for speaking to Hinata. Shan in such a manner. Naruto remarked, that was odd, as they observed Sasuke withdraw. Hinata nodded in agreement. She was glad that Sasuke would no longer try to bully them, even though she was a little disappointed that she hadn't made a new friend. All right, let's have lunch. As he opened his lunchbox, Naruto uttered those words. The young blonde boy said, so now that I'm a ninja, I don't have to hide my skills. He had dirty, shaggy, blonde hair that was almost shoulder length. His tan face was framed by two bangs, and each cheek had 3 faint whisker-like marks. He wore a soft leather turtleneck vest that was sleeveless, tight, fitting, and typically unzipped at the neck. He was dressed in matching black pants with white bandages tied off at the ankles. He wore black fingerless gloves with a metal plate on top, matching elbow guards, and 2 matching kunai holders with space for scrolls on both legs. Naruto wore black sandals instead of the typical blue ones. Although it was all very stylish, nobody was aware that Naruto did not choose his outfit. After seeing him wearing a neon orange jumpsuit, his best friend had chosen everything for him. She lost faith in Naruto's ability to choose his own attire after witnessing that monstrosity. Yes, Naruto-kun, you no longer have to hold back. Though, I'm not sure that you really tried, Hiruzen Sarutobi remarked, glaring at the 13-year-old boy. Naruto flexed his muscles occasionally to ensure that everyone avoided Hinata, even though he had committed to remaining in the dead last position. His statement that people might pursue Hinata because of Naruto seems to have been taken seriously by Naruto. Hiruzen had initially been upset with Naruto. He had totally betrayed the real intentions of Hiruzen. But Naruto never went all out. He never showed his full strength. He just told people that he was better than he appeared to be. Since academy students would eventually become shinobi and shinobi used every secret ace they could find, it was not unusual for them to conceal their true abilities. Hiruzen hoped they would believe Naruto was doing the same, even though they usually came from clans. As long as no one knew how far ahead Naruto was, he should be safe from Danzo's grasp, even though Hiruzen knew that was pushing it to the brink of breaking. Sweet. Naruto exclaimed, grinning lopsidedly at the Hokage. And I did too try, it's not my fault that I'm just too amazingly powerful to keep all my skills hidden, he laughed. There was some truth to it, even though it was primarily a joke. Over the years, he did make a few mistakes, and people realized that he was concealing his strength. Hiruzen laughed. I'm sure that's the case. Now, when you do decide to show off, try not to overdo it. I really don't need more paperwork, Hiruzen begged. He thought they might as well strap it to him because he had spent so much time at this blasted desk. When have I ever overdone anything? With a note of irritation in his voice, Hiruzen deadpanned, Hell Week. Naruto created Hell Week, a week-long celebration, to commemorate a significant epiphany he had at the age of 8. He at last understood that he never needed to bother censoring himself because he didn't care what other people thought of him. He was free to say anything that came to mind and do anything that wasn't against the law, though he did most of the things that were against the law. That was the beginning of Hell Week. Everyone and everything was the target of practical jokes during that week. When it came to Naruto's tricks, nobody was safe and nothing was sacred. In just the past year, he released the several hives at the Aburame clan compound, poisoned the Akamichi, set up a swarm of aphids to be released into the Yamanaka flower shop, dropped off intractable puzzles at the Nara household, caused Shikaku to have a minor breakdown when he couldn't solve one of the puzzles, vandalized the Hokage monument 5 times, and organized a group gathering of ugly people to surround the Hyuga compound when they trained their all-seeing eyes. He also played a practical joke on Junin by stealing and holding for ransom a particular masked ninja's favorite book. He forced Kakashi to do embarrassing things in public instead of giving him money, including forcing him to wear the green jumpsuit of his longtime rival. He set up accidents and shut down all of Konoha's dango shops. Enko's cries were audible throughout the village. He also pulled a prank on Anbu. He even wrote their names on their masks and paint, bombed their bases and training areas. Additionally, he had unintentionally pranked a root base. He took on the task of decorating their plain white masks after deciding they were too dull. When Danzo had learned of that, it had almost made him have a heart attack. After the first Hell Week, things had gotten so bad that Hiruzen used it as a training ground for Anbu to improve their response times in the event of a terrorist attack. Many of the victims demanded that Naruto be imprisoned. He must have been doing something very illegal. Yes, it was. However, Naruto left no evidence, so they were unable to put him in jail. Innocently, Naruto said, "I'm afraid I don't understand what you mean, Gigi. I know nothing of this, Hell Week," with a hint of pride in his voice. Hell Week was his favorite. In a loving yet sarcastic tone, Hiruzen responded, "Oh, I'm sure you're innocent of all charges." He was aware that Naruto flexed his muscles in addition to celebrating when he realized he could do whatever he wanted. He was aware that Naruto's attacks on those who had mistreated Hinata that year were not an accident. Naruto extended his hand expectantly and said, "Sure am, now I do believe that you owe me money, Gigi." He was awaiting his first A-ranked mission's pay. Mizuki had attempted to persuade Naruto to take the Forbidden Scroll and use it to master one jutsu. When Mizuki said he could ensure Naruto would eventually join Hinata's team, he had agreed. Rather than slinking into the Hokage's office to steal it, Naruto told Gigi what Mizuki was planning, and the Hokage let him take the scroll. Unprepared for what he would see, Naruto had chosen to peek at the Forbidden Scroll after arriving at the clearing. He was unsure of how to interpret the first jutsu when he read it. He had been training with this jutsu for years. In fact, he honestly believed he had invented it himself. He was unable to come up with a plausible explanation for his knowledge of an already existing jutsu. Naruto questioned his strange instincts after giving them some thought. Over the years, he realized how bizarre it was that his body was capable of doing things he had never heard of. When others attempted to teach him incorrect techniques, how did he know how to throw a kunai? How did he effortlessly become proficient in both taijutsu and kenjutsu styles? How on earth was he aware of an existing jutsu? He was at a loss for words. Though he wanted to investigate a bit first, Naruto was seriously considering asking the Hokage what was happening. He would definitely ask Gigi if he was unable to locate anything. After defeating Mizuki with terrifying ease, Naruto gave the scroll back. He was going to get paid because of this. Hiruzen threw a scroll to Naruto and grinned. The Hokage made fun of Naruto's S-ranked ranking in the Akamichi Book of Eaters by saying, "There's your pay for your first unofficial mission, although I'll put it in your file as an official A-ranked. Try to spend some of it on something other than food." Naruto's exercise routine was astounding. Because of Naruto's daily acts of pure insanity, even Guy and his clone had blanched. He had to maintain an incredible calorie intake as a result of this, as well as the resistance seal he had developed. To maintain his health, Naruto consumed 12,000 calories a day on average. He frequently ate out when he went to a store. In fact, it was so frequent that the proprietors of the restaurants even urged Naruto to dine there. He had ultimately been correct. He was now a remarkable 4 feet 10. Given that he still had plenty of time to mature, it wasn't bad for a 13-year-old. Ha Gigi, very funny, Naruto remarked while putting the scroll in his pocket. Hiruzen was about to respond when a child's shouting voice cut him off. The kid ran toward the Hokage with a shuriken and yelled, "On guard, old man. Prepare to hand over that oof," at him. Without thinking, Naruto reacted. He didn't even realize the attacker was a child until it was too late because he believed his surrogate grandfather was a threat. He extended a small amount of chakra toward the boy's leg after channeling it from the bottom of his foot. The boy fell flat on his face as a tiny phantom hand reached up from the floorboards and grabbed his ankle. The Hokage lowered his hat in shame, and Naruto blinked in surprise. This was the third attempt on his grandson's life this week. Feeling deeply ashamed that he had tripped over nothing, Konohamaru slowly stood up and rubbed his face in agony. However, he was unable to inform others of this, so he naturally placed the blame on someone. "You tripped me," he said, accusing Naruto, who was ironically correct. Notwithstanding the boy's attempt to kill Gigi, Naruto was obstinate and apologized for tripping the boy. With a smooth lie, he said, "Not the way I saw it, brat. You tripped over your own 2 feet." As he walked toward Naruto, Konohamaru shouted, "You did too," as though Naruto should cower from his presence. When Naruto grabbed him by the front of his shirt, he was about to have a rude awakening. An unfamiliar voice cried out in horror, "Unhand the honorable grandson." Naruto turned to see a man wearing black eyewear and swathed from head to toe. Looking down, Naruto saw the arrogantly smiling boy in his hands. He sneered, "What? Not gonna hit me since my grandpa is the Hokage?" In order to avoid being asked to testify about what would happen next, the Hokage lowered his hat. "My grandson, you have made a very serious error." Naruto spiked the boy, saying, "I don't care if he's your grandmother." Since the boy was wearing a helmet, it was acceptable. Ebisu cried out in distress, and Konohamaru bounced, not believing the demon brat would go so far as to attack the honorable grandson in front of the Hokage. Naruto said, brushing past a scowling Ebisu, now that's taken care of, I'm off to find Hinata. Chan. See ya, Gigi. The hatred was almost palpable to Naruto from behind his glasses. Ebisu gave the Hokage a perplexed look. For attacking his family, why didn't he demand that the demon's head be placed on a silver plate? Ebisu looked at him, and Hiruzen sighed. Similar to Naruto, he sensed waves of rage at the blonde emanating from Ebisu. Hokage. Sama, that boy just assaulted the honorable grandson. Hiruzen said, oh, I didn't see anything, in a tone that was excruciatingly false. Konohamaru moaned as he regained consciousness before Ebisu could reply. I see you're awake, Kono-chan, Hiruzen said, referring to his grandson by his nickname. Holding his head, Konohamaru responded with yet another agonized groan. Konohamaru inquired, who was that guy? In an attempt to identify the boy who stood out from the other boys in the village. Hiruzen gave his grandson a smile. That was Naruto Uzumaki, one of the greatest heroes of this village, Hiruzen informed Ebisu, glaring directly at him. Konohamaru took notice of that. He exclaimed, really? What did he do? Quite enthusiastically. Hiruzen gave him another smile. Naruto-kun protects the village from something that could wipe the village away in a second, every single day. And he never gets thanked for it, Hiruzen responded. Hiruzen briefly considered whether he was giving too much information, but he quickly dismissed the idea. Being young, Konohamaru had been taught that the Kyuubi had perished along with the Yondaime, but he would never have realized the connection. When Ebisu managed to resist the urge to tisk, Konohamaru's eyes widened in amazement. In addition to being in his Hokage's presence, which would be completely disrespectful, Konohamaru would inquire as to why he didn't like the brat. Ebisu adjusted his spectacles. Ebisu said, come now, honorable grandson. We have training to do, but then he saw that a third person was absent from the room. Alongside Naruto strolled down the street in the direction of a bakery that Hinata frequently frequented. She frequently ate cinnamon buns and other sweet pastries there. The Hyuga heiress had a serious sweet tooth, it turns out. With a loud yawn, Naruto threw his arms behind his head and used the moment to glance out of the corner of his eye, noticing that a box-shaped rock was still pursuing him. They were doing a terrible job of following him, but he had no idea who they were. Naruto quickly grew weary of his second shadow and decided to abandon the rock by flying to the roofs. He saw Hinata in her regular location by the window when he walked up to the bakery a few minutes later. He smiled and walked in like any other customer. A cheerful, enthusiastic man behind the counter said, hello Naruto-san. Is there anything we can get for you today? Naruto gave a headshake. He said, no, I'm just here for Hinata-chan. And he was almost impressed by how quickly the man's expression changed from one of happiness to one of disgust at his mere presence, despite his best efforts to hide it. He said with barely disguised disdain, she's in her usual spot, and then he went to see how a cake was doing. As Hinata devoured a cinnamon bun, Naruto grinned, utterly disregarding the surprised expressions she was receiving from some of the more recent patrons. They were unaware that when it came to her favorite food, Hinata never minced words. With practiced ease, Naruto slid into the seat across from her and swiped it out of her hands as she was about to take another big bite. A tiny smile tugged at the corner of her lips as she glared at him. He took a bite out of the stolen candy and said, hello Hinata-chan. How are you this fine evening? With a sigh, Hinata reached into the nearly empty case and took out another cinnamon bun. She said sweetly, I was doing just fine until you showed up, while also biting into her treat. Naruto smiled slyly at his best friend. His tone was offended. Oh, is that how it is? Fine then, I won't pay for your food then, he said. The long, standing inside joke was dropped as Hinata's brow furrowed. Naruto-kun. I asked you to stop stealing. That was how Naruto was able to cover his outrageous food expenses. He would break into the homes of people who were excessively wealthy and, to be honest, they didn't deserve to steal some valuable items, and then resell them on the red light district black market. It wasn't clear to Naruto that what he was doing was wrong. In addition to giving him excellent practice with his lockpicking and stealth skills, he was taking from those who had too much and attempted to ruin his life. To defend himself, Naruto raised his arms. Naruto spun his hands distractingly and a scroll materialized in his hand. I didn't steal anything. I just got payment. Hinata never grew weary of seeing it because she believed it to be magic, even though he didn't use chakra or fuinjutsu. He concluded, smiling foolishly at Hinata's stuttering but joyful expression. For the rank mission, he said, Hinata was about to ramble. The Hokage gave you an A-rank mission. When? What was it? But Naruto interrupted her with a flourish. No, the Hokage didn't technically give it to me. It was more of a coincidence. Yesterday, Mizuki tried to trick me into stealing the Forbidden Scroll, and when I told Gigi, he asked me to play along to see if Mizuki was working with anyone. I beat him up quickly enough and got my payment this morning, Naruto stated with a perplexed expression. Naruto asked Hinata, though, something did happen. You know my clone jutsu? And Hinata nodded. Well, before Mizuki came I looked into the Forbidden Scroll. And the first jutsu in there was something called the Shadow Clone Jutsu, which is a solid clone purely made out of chakra that can send its memories to the original. Hinata's gaze expanded. Naruto had just explained the jutsu that he had performed years ago based on his instincts. Incredulous, Hinata questioned, but that? How? With a serious expression, Naruto leaned in. I have no idea. I reread the text over a dozen times. It's the same jutsu down to the last detail, Naruto replied. As he fidgeted with the black headband on his forehead, which was mostly hidden by his wild hair, Naruto whispered conspiratorially, I don't know how, but my instincts told me to create a jutsu that already existed. A kinjutsu at that. Have you asked the Hokage? Hinata inquired, assuming that Naruto would approach the Hokage first when discussing jutsu related matters. Naruto shook his head. In all honesty, he still harbored a persistent fear that Gigi would no longer love him if he turned out to be a freak. Only when there was no other choice would he ask the old man, even though he really wanted to. Naruto gave a headshake. Hinata's eyes softened as she realized Naruto's genuine hesitancy, but she remained silent. I want to dig around a little first before I bring this to Gigi. With a gentle smile, she assured him that she would always be there for him, just as he had been for her. A square-shaped box shuffled a few feet from their table, interrupting Naruto as he was about to speak. Incredulous, Naruto gazed down at the box. Who in their right mind would create such a poor camouflage design? Did this stalker really think they were going to fool anyone inside a store? The rock had the same texture as the gravel outside and was shaped like a box. Hinata looked at Naruto inquisitively. Is he yours? Hinata inquired, giving her best friend a playful glance. Naruto gazed thoughtfully. Why are you following me? He asked, before the rock burst into a colorful burst of smoke. I don't remember adopting any rocks lately, he said, tossing the remaining pieces of his cinnamon bun at the rock. Hinata and Naruto realized it was Konohamaru when the smoke cleared. The smaller boy exclaimed, I see you have seen through my clever disguise, loudly. Hinata laughed. What a cute little boy. Naruto was a little impressed that he could move, but he demanded, You're that brat in Gigi's office. Why are you following me? He had given the child a harder slam than he intended. In denial, Konohamaru screamed, I'm not a brat. He smiled arrogantly and said, and I was following you because I want you to train me. No, Konohamaru made a face. Failure. But why? Please teach me, boss. He begged Naruto, who gave no response. Naruto rolled his eyes until he caught Hinata's you know what you should do expression. He let out a sigh. He was unable to refuse Hinata-chan. Naruto questioned, recalling the scowling man in Gigi's office, why do you want me to be your sensei? Don't you already have one? Konohamaru gave an unhappy nod. He answered bewildered, looking Naruto, yeah, but he never teaches me anything good. And he's not a hero like you are. He could not recall anything heroic he had done recently. Wondering where Konohamaru got the idea, Naruto questioned, oh, I'm a hero? Konohamaru asked with stars in his eyes as the boy nodded and said, yeah, Gigi told me how you protect the village every day from something that could wipe us away in an instant. He didn't say what though, can you tell me? At the moment, he was visualizing his new boss easily defeating a massive army of ninja. Instead of laughing at the boy's gullibility, Naruto thumped him on his helmet. Naruto glanced at Hinata as Konohamaru started to jump up and down with excitement. Sorry, can't tell ya, but I guess I can carve out some time to train you. He said, you want to come along, Hinata-chan? Hinata gave a headshake. Sorry Naruto-kun, but I have a sparring match with my little sister, she grumbled. Because of the rigorous training she and Naruto had done for years, Hinata consistently prevailed in the matches. She detested the sparring sessions, though, because she could sense how each one was tearing her family apart. Hanabi would always yell, I hate you, as she stormed off in rage after she won. As he chastised Hanabi, her father's praise of her only served to exacerbate the tension between her and her sister. The elders would look at her angrily. They despised her because she had created her own gentle fist style in addition to being friends with Naruto. They believed she was undermining years of custom. Heat flooded her cheeks as Naruto smiled at her with a knowing grin. Naruto said, "Soke Hinata. Chan. Tell Hanabi I said to make sure she keeps her elbows up," and got to his feet. On the rare occasions that Hanabi caught him and Hinata training together, he had been assisting her with her forms. For a non-Hyuga to assist a Hyuga with their stances would seem extremely strange to some, but Hanabi was aware that Naruto assisted Hinata with her own style. She wanted him to do the same to her, of course. Konohamaru glanced at both of them. He held up a pinky and said, "Hey girlie, are you bosses?" Hinata's vision darkened and she flushed violently, but she forced herself not to pass out. Even though she was much more self-assured, whenever her romantic feelings for the blonde surfaced, she was always reduced to a stuttering idiot. Naruto appeared to be totally unaware of her attempts to initiate a romantic relationship with him and had no idea how she felt about him. She would accidentally brush his hand, for instance, in an attempt to get it through his thick skull so she could hold it. He would merely mumble an apology. She considered just telling him how she felt, but as previously mentioned, whenever she mentioned her romantic feelings for Naruto, she would stutter so badly that, even if she had managed to stay awake long enough to tell them, no one could have understood what she was saying. When Naruto heard Konohamaru's stupid remarks, his cheeks also darkened. Though he never pursued them, he did harbor feelings for his longtime best friend. He had heard of a phenomenon known as the friend zone, and was positive that was what had happened to him, in addition to not wanting to cause awkwardness between himself and his only true friend. Hinata frequently referred to him as her best friend, and every guy was aware that it was nearly impossible to leave the friend zone once you were in it. But Naruto conceded his fate. Even though Hinata would eventually have to wed someone else for her clan, he would still be there for her, regardless of whether she ever felt the same way about him. "I do," she would say, and he would stand by her side while she tore out his heart. His cheeks were red. What do you have to go and say that for brat?" he asked. Almost rushing out of the store, he waved a quick goodbye to Hinata and grabbed Konohamaru by his scarf. "Come on. Let's get your training started," he said hurriedly. Alongside the Hokage with his office crowded with Junin, Hiruzen sat at his desk. "I trust you all know you're here to receive your genin teams?" he said rhetorically after puffing on his pipe. "Hi, s" were muttered by the Junin. Most of them had no interest in playing against a genin team. Because they had to train the brats they were assigned, Junin who took on a genin team typically had to put their own careers on hold for a while. There were two exceptions, though: Kurenai Hai and Kakashi Hitaki. There is no way Kakashi could be more thrilled. For the first time, he would be able to communicate with his younger brother in person rather than via scrolls. For the first time in 13 years, he would be able to train him and protect him as he should. Kurenai was excited to train her little surrogate sister. Ko eventually had a minor breakdown because the stress of Hinata's frequent disappearance had become too much for him. But more significantly, Kurenai had assumed the position and viewed Hinata as her younger sister. Because she would run off to train with Naruto, for example, under Ko's supervision, she didn't have as much interaction with the girl as she would have liked, but when they did, it was as if they were real sisters. Taking up the sheet of paper listing the most appropriate teams, Hiruzen said, "Let's get started, shall we?" A few specialized teams were formed based on abilities and teamwork, but the majority of teams were formed based on grades. For instance, the Ino Shika Show Team. Team 1. Began Hiruzen. Knowing that he was going to receive a lot of criticism, Hiruzen said, "Team 7. Naruto Uzumaki, Hinata Hyuga, and Sasuke Uchiha under Kakashi Hitaki," with some reluctance. This was a job he detested. "All due respect Hokage Sama, but is it really wise to place Sasuke Uchiha on the same team with Naruto Uzumaki? It is my understanding that the Uchiha does not work well with others, especially not with the Uzumaki, and has a hard time sympathizing with anyone. This would be a serious issue on any team, but with those two, it will only be exacerbated and all three will fail," Kakashi said with a bit of annoyance in as he believed that Sasuke was a bully, and he would much rather have someone else on his team. Hiruzen let out a sigh. Hiruzen responded with a displeased, one-eyed glare. "Kakashi, you are the last Sharingan user in this village. You must teach young Sasuke to use it when he awakens it," Hiruzen said. "Sasuke has no concept of teamwork. He has no concept of empathy. He should be on a team with a Genjutsu specialist or a Yamanaka, regardless of his Dujutsu. The boy needs mental help that I am ill-equipped to provide. We all know I'm not a mental health specialist. I can certainly take time to train him in the use of the Sharingan, if he ever gets his. But that isn't a good enough reason to screw over two other shinobi candidates," Kakashi said with a seriousness that shocked many of the Junin in attendance. Teams passed or failed together, as was well known. Hiruzen gave Kakashi a narrowed look. We both know that Naruto is smart enough to see through your test. He'll convince Sasuke to work together with Hinata and himself. And need I remind you that when you take on a genin team that you are allowed no favoritism. You are there to train their strengths and get rid of their weaknesses and bad habits. In the event that they do pass, that is what you will be doing with Sasuke's arrogance, warned him. Although Kakashi could see the Hokage's point of view, he didn't think it was possible to eradicate Uchiha conceit once it had taken hold. Obito, Shushi, and Itachi were the only 3 Uchihas he could recall who lacked the cockiness that is characteristic of their clan. Kakashi was convinced that the only reason they had been the exceptions was because they had refused to succumb to the conceit. Before he passed away, Obito, Kami bless his heart, was a fool who never took anything seriously. Based on his brief encounters with him, Shushi was no different. Itachi appeared to hold the astounding conviction that the teachings of his clan were incorrect. In a sense, though, Itachi had been justified in his conceit. Kakashi didn't want Sasuke on his team for other reasons, though. Months had passed since the Uchiha massacre before Sasuke finally understood the lesson that Naruto had learned from his now deceased kin when he had defeated him in a spar all those years prior. Nobody had anticipated the way he had responded. Sasuke was unconcerned. Sasuke showed no concern, but Kakashi was unsure if the child had finally turned into a psychopath or if he was just denying that his clan was capable of such heinous deeds. He apologized, but it wasn't sincere, he just didn't care. It isn't favoritism. I've been following this year's class and I don't even need to test them to know that Naruto and Sasuke will self-destruct as a team, causing untold problems, Kakashi said in a last-ditch effort. Hiruzen appeared to be thinking deeply. Kakashi did make a valid point. It was nearly unbearable for Naruto and Sasuke to be in the same room. He initially believed that they would both be professionals if they were on the same team. Their animosity for one another would not stand in the way of a mission. However, the elderly Hokage had been reminded by Kakashi that perhaps he was placing too much trust in what still amounted to children. Hiruzen let out a sigh. Yes, I see your point. Naruto and Sasuke may not be professional enough to put personal feelings aside for the mission, Hiruzen said, apologizing for his advanced age. He was not nearly as sharp as he had been even a year ago, and Hiruzen had noticed this. He was unable to recognize patterns or anticipate conflicts like the one that just occurred because he was forgetting small details. Who knew how many moments of clarity he had left, but he could still recall things if they were significant enough or if a life depended on them. He could also predict a conflict. His body and mind were betraying him. If he didn't find a replacement quickly, he could only assume the worst. He glanced at the papers once more. Hiruzen said, Team 7 now consists of Hinata Hyuga, Naruto Uzumaki, and Kiba Inuzuka under Kakashi Hitaki as a heavy assault tracking team, before turning to face Kurenai, who appeared to be on the verge of losing her calm. Kurenai spoke up, barely concealing her rage behind a fa section 8 of politeness. It seems unfair that Kakashi Hitaki gets to choose his squad while the rest of our preferences are ignored. I put in a formal request to make a tracking team with Hinata Hyuga, Kiba Inuzuka, and Shino Aburame, Kurenai said. With an authoritative, irate glare, Hiruzen stated, Junin Hitaki brought up a valid reason to change the teams. A conflict that I managed to miss because I'm more accustomed to dealing with professional ninjas than academy children. Further, formal requests are not a guarantee that you will get what you want and you know that. Team 8 will consist of Sasuke Uchiha, Sakura Haruno, and Shino Aburame under Kurenai Hai as a Genjutsu tracking team, Hiruzen said in a moment of clarity. Kurenai was aware that Sakura was very skilled at Genjutsu and that Sasuke should also be naturally gifted. With the jutsu he should learn from Kakashi with the Sharingan. Sasuke could also serve as the team's heavy hitter. They were all potential trackers, and Sasuke could surpass an Inuzuka if he managed to obtain his family's summoning contract with cats. Kurenai acknowledged the change by nodding, demonstrating her understanding of it. She knew that, unlike Kakashi, she had no legitimate reason to demand another change, even though she would have much preferred to have the team she had asked for. Proud of himself for calming things down, Hiruzen gave himself a mental pat on the back. Hiruzen concluded, and his son nodded. Since Team 9 is still in rotation, Team 10 will consist of Shikamaru Nara, Shoji Akamichi, and Ino Yamanaka under Asumaseru Tobi as a capture and interrogation team. You all are dismissed. Alongside Naruto as Naruto lay stretched out on a log, he observed Konohamaru's continued failure at the seductive jutsu. It was clever, even though it was such a perverted jutsu. It was an excellent diversionary tactic because the majority of shinobi were men, and men were all secretly perverts. Furthermore, Naruto could only speculate about the level of mayhem Konohamaru's jutsu would cause. The thought caused Naruto to smile a little. Naruto remarked, "You got the curvy part right, but they're in the wrong places," while examining yet another unsuccessful attempt. "Gah! It's too hard," exclaimed Konohamaru, exasperated. He had spent hours practicing this jutsu. Naruto let out a sigh. Naruto posed the rhetorical question, is that the attitude of the future Hokage? A few hours ago, Konohamaru had confided in Naruto about his reasons for attacking Gigi every day and his fears that he was not seen as his own person but rather as the honorable grandson by everyone. After puffing his cheeks out in frustration at Naruto's remarks, Konohamaru tried the jutsu once more, but he was cut off by a voice. Then Ebisu leapt down from a nearby tree and exclaimed, "Honorable grandson, I've been looking all over for you." Konohamaru appeared startled and then resolute. He shouted, "Go away, boss is teaching me now." The mention of the Kyuubi Jinchuriki made Ebisu tisk. "Honorable grandson, this boy is nothing but a dead last fool, whereas I am an elite Junin. I can teach you the secrets and shortcuts to becoming H. There aren't any shortcuts. You gotta work hard to become Hokage. And don't call boss a dead last, he's way cooler than you." Konohamaru interrupted him, shouting. Konohamaru called out the name of his new technique before Ebisu could defend himself. Sexy Jutsu. Smoke erupted around the boy, but Konohamaru was replaced by a stunning, curvaceous brunette. Ebisu retreated a short distance, but the jutsu had no effect on him. He fixed his glasses and reprimanded, "Honorable grandson, you should not spend any time on such a silly technique." As he transformed back into his original form, Konohamaru cried out, "Why isn't it working?" Naruto said, rising from his log, "Because he's a closet pervert. You need something with a little more kick to deal with his kind. But don't worry, I have a technique that will work just fine on him. I sincerely doubt." Naruto yelled, "Genjutsu! Pervert's paradise," while employing one of the two genjutsu. It had an instant impact. Ebisu trailed off as two twin streams of blood emerged from his nose and a massive perverted smile started to form. Still wearing the full blown perverted smile, Naruto approached and gave the man a gentle poke in the forehead, causing him to topple over. With a little kick to the ribs to check if his designated tutor was truly unconscious, Konohamaru questioned, "What happened to him?" Naruto replied menacingly, "I put him in a genjutsu where all of his twisted dreams will come true. It's very dangerous because once you're in it, you may never want to leave." Before he noticed that dinner time was drawing near and glanced up at the sun, Naruto said, "I think that's enough training for one day. Let's get you home," as he made his way to the site of the Sarutobi clan. "Okay, boss," exclaimed Konohamaru, who hurried after him. Alongside Hinata with 3 quick pokes up her attacker's arm, Hinata quickly rendered the limb useless after deflecting a blow to her stomach. Hanabi ignored her now useless arm and leapt back. She was on the verge of attacking again when she was stopped. "That's enough, Hanabi," her dad remarked. Despite his hesitancy, Hanabi and Hinata obeyed. "Yes, father," they all said simultaneously. Hiyashi gave them both a look. Hinata nodded in agreement, not at all anticipating what would happen next. "As expected, Hinata, you were excellent. You displayed accuracy and speed worthy of being the Hyuga heiress." As his youngest daughter tried to ignore her tingling arm, Hiyashi turned to face her. He scolded his daughter, giving her a disillusioned expression that Hinata had grown accustomed to during the first 7 years of her life. "Hanabi, your form has a number of holes in it and your speed was lacking as was your accuracy. These may be excused because of your age, but you will not always be young. Train harder." Hanabi gave a very glum response, winced at every word. "Yes, father." She would have started crying if it weren't for her pride. No matter what she accomplished, she always felt inadequate and in her sister's shadow. He turned to face Hanabi and said, "Good. You two have the rest of the day off." He then left the dojo, saying, "If I were you, I would use that time to work on the holes in your stances." Hinata gave her trembling sister a gentle glance. She said, "Hanabi," as she extended her hand to console her family, only to have it smacked away. Hanabi screamed, "Leave me alone," as she turned to face the door leading to the training courtyard. Hinata frantically called out to her sister, "I could help you with your training, Hanabi," in an attempt to stop their distance from growing. "I don't need you to train me. You're only strong because that Naruto guy trains you," sneered Hanabi, who then hurried away, leaving a dejected looking Hinata in her wake. Hinata glanced at the door that her father had neglected. As she left the dojo, she muttered to herself, "Father, don't you see you tearing our family apart? The following day their sensei was over an hour and a half late, so Naruto, Hinata, and Kiba sat in their empty classroom. Naruto remarked, "You think since she's known me for years, she wouldn't call me that Naruto guy? I mean, it's kind of insulting," as Hinata described Hanabi's recent outburst. Naruto.kun. Hinata uttered sorrowfully as Naruto's attempt to make her smile failed. Naruto let out a deep sigh. "There isn't much you can do, Hinata-chan. You've tried to talk to your father. He won't listen. You've tried helping Hanabi and she hates you for being stronger than her." Naruto continued with a shrug. Naruto wasn't used to telling people that there was no chance of winning, but he and Hinata had done everything they could to mend the division within the Hyuga clan. Naruto was unsure of what to do because the rift had only gotten worse over the previous 7 years. "Could you try to help her out with her stances more often? She thinks I got so strong because I trained with you," replied Hinata. Although Hanabi would never acknowledge it, she held Naruto in high regard. She immediately respected the blonde after witnessing Naruto's crazy training regimen. She greatly respected him, but she also thought he was batshit crazy for doing a third of what he did. Naruto gave a nod. He gave it some thought and said, "Yeah, I'll train her when I have time to train Konohamaru. That's going to be an amusing couple of hours," he said quietly while laughing. Hinata gave him a kind smile. "Thank you, Naruto.kun." Naruto simply returned the smile. "No need to thank me, Hinata-chan." When Kiba yelled, "Wait, you just became a genin. Why in the hell do you get students already?" Akamaru responded with a supportive bark. Naruto appeared to think about it. "Maybe it's because I'm more awesome than you. Or maybe it's because you smell like wet dog," he said in a sarcastic manner. Kiba was neither despised nor hated by Naruto. They shared a lot of traits, including sarcasm, sleeping in class, and pulling practical jokes. Additionally, they were attracted to the Hyuga heiress. Kiba had tried to formally court Hinata on multiple occasions. They were both clan heirs, so he couldn't just ask her out, but Naruto undermined every effort. The list went on and on. He would sneak in and ruin his nice clothes, add laxatives to his food, give Akamaru fleas, and so on. Hiyashi went so far as to say that Naruto already played the part of an overly protective father, so he would never need to do it himself. Because of politics, Hinata was unable to avoid the dates with Kiba and the other suitors, even though she didn't particularly enjoy them. She was always appreciative of Naruto's tendency to start arguments and give the suitors an excuse to end the date early. "I don't smell like wet dog," snarled Kiba, but Akamaru didn't say anything in agreement this time. Naruto responded in a lighthearted manner, "Yes, you do. I'm surprised even Akamaru can stand to be near you. He must be a very loyal friend." When Akamaru barked in agreement, he laughed. Kiba snarled once more, hoping Hinata would leap to his defense. "Traitor, I do not smell like wet dog. Tell him, Hinata-chan," he said. Fortunately for Hinata, a masked Junin with silver gravity, defying hair emerged as the door slid open. He acted shy and apologized for being late, asking innocently, "Yo, are you Team 7? He was absolutely not. For once, he had considered being on time to see his younger brother, but he had made up his mind not to. He had a reputation to uphold. It wasn't a very good one, to be sure, but it was his reputation, and he would use it however he pleased. On the man, Naruto squinted his eyes. Although his voice sounded remarkably familiar, he was unable to identify the man because the only features on display were his eye and hair. Kiba yelled, "Yes, you're late, sensei," as Akamaru and his master barked. Kakashi, like Naruto, rubbed the back of his head idly. With the same hesitant tone, he replied, "Sorry about that. I had to help an old lady with her groceries." No one in the room said anything, but no one in the room believed him. Kakashi said, "Well, meet me on the roof," and he walked up to the roof, avoiding the spotlight. Before getting up and walking to the roof on their own, the three genin exchanged glances, seemingly agreeing in silence that they had been given the short stick when it came to senseis. On the roof in front of their new sensei, who was reading an orange book that Naruto recognized, the three genin sat down on the steps. "Our sensei is a pervert and a terrible liar. Fantastic." He looked at his new future soldiers and put the romance book away. "Now that you're all here, why don't you introduce yourselves? Stuff like your name, likes, dislikes, hobbies, dreams for the future, stuff like that," he lazily said. With a head tilt toward Hinata, he said, "You start." She pointedly regarded Kakashi after recognizing the trashy book. "My name is Hinata Hyuga. I like training, cinnamon buns, and Naruto-kun. I dislike perverts and bullies," she said. My hobbies are training with Naruto-kun and flower pressing, and my dream for the future is to get rid of most of the traditions in my clan when I'm clan head, hesitated Hinata. She was naturally soft spoken, but she didn't stutter. Kakashi gave nod. Having followed the two until last year, he was mostly aware of that, but it was always pleasant to learn about it through less eerie means. Naruto made the decision to go next. He stated, I'm Naruto Uzumaki. I like training, food in general, the sky, and Hinata-chan, omitting Hell Week as a precaution. I dislike arrogant bastards, confined places, and people who try to hurt Hinata-chan. My hobbies are pranking, training, making new seals, and training with Hinata-chan. My dreams for the future? Become Hokage? No. King of the world? Maybe. Naruto thought to himself and then snapped his fingers. He smiled and said, my dream is to become Emperor of the Universe, having just chosen a dream. His dream wasn't real. His ultimate goal was to protect Hinata until the end of his life and assist her in realizing her dreams. Additionally, he desired to be able to fly. The sky always drew Naruto in, though he was unable to explain why. Hinata once remarked that she was more accustomed to looking up at his bare neck than she was to seeing his face because of how bad things had gotten. Instead of being bound to the ground by gravity, he simply felt like he belonged in the skies. Kakashi nodded, understanding that his stay with the Uchiha was the reason for his dislike of confining places. Although Kakashi had anticipated it, it broke his heart that Naruto was still coping with the trauma he had experienced. To be honest, Kurenai could have made a strong argument for having both Sasuke and Naruto on her team if she had studied this year's Genin as thoroughly as he had. However, she showed no concern for Naruto. Despite Kakashi's lack of space to talk, Naruto refused to participate in therapy sessions and would not discuss what transpired in the room. Kakashi could tell that he would not even discuss it with Hinata. For the past year, Naruto had essentially vanished. Other than to eat or attend Hell Week, he was nowhere to be found. Even Anbu trackers, some of whom were in Izuka's, he avoided. Despite knowing where he had gone, Hinata would not tell anyone, and not even the Hokage. She assured them that Naruto was training and that she would not betray his confidence if it were kept a secret. That had not pleased either the Hokage or the council. Hiruzen approved of it as long as he wasn't doing anything risky, but Hinata was obviously unyielding. At that, no one saw her gulp. Kiba's loud declaration jolted Kakashi out of his reverie. Kiba glared at Naruto, who was staring up at the sky. I'm Kiba in Izuka. I like Akamaru, Hinata-chan, and my clan. I dislike having to clean the kennels, my sisters when they annoy me, and people who don't mind their own business, Kiba said. With a savage smile, Kiba exclaimed. My dreams are to become the best hunter.nin in the village. My hobbies are playing with Akamaru and training with Akamaru. Kiba's conclusion prompted Kakashi to start his introduction. My name is Kakashi Hitaki. I don't really feel like telling you my likes or dislikes. My hobbies are. My dream for the future. That seems kinda personal, so I won't be telling you that either, he said with a grin on his face. The introduction did not impress the genin. They all thought at once, we only learned his name. Now that we all know each other, I'm afraid I have some bad news for you. You're not genin yet, he stated. Hinata's eyes widened as Naruto appeared unconcerned, but on the inside he was trying to figure out what the man meant. Kiba insisted, what do you mean we're not genin? We passed the exam. Kakashi just laughed. That test was merely meant to root out the hopeless cases. Each Junin gives their potential genin team a test. Despite sounding so simple, the failure rate is over 66% and the failures are sent back to the academy, Kakashi scoffed. Naruto furrowed his brow in perplexity. What do you mean that they're sent back to the academy? I haven't seen any of the kids that graduated back there, he replied. Kakashi gave nod. Remembering how close he and his team had come to failing their exam, Kakashi explained with a slight shudder. They get sent to a different academy that focuses more on the physical aspects of being shinobi, but even when they graduate from that academy, they don't get Junin instructors. They get put on reserves until there's an opening in a genin squad or they prove themselves valuable enough to be apprenticed. That made much more sense, so Naruto nodded. After saying, if that's the only question, meet me at Training Ground 7 at 5 am, and I recommend that you don't eat breakfast. You'll just throw it up. He vanished into a whirlpool of leaves. Naruto stretched with a sigh. Naruto said, well, that's a shock. Wanna go get something to eat, Hinata-chan? And his friend nodded. With a thoughtless tone, Naruto turned to Kiba and asked, you wanna tag along? Since we're teammates now? He didn't really want Kiba to go, but he reasoned that he should at least make an effort to get along with the Inuzuka. Kiba gave a headshake. He lied and said, I have to train for tomorrow, because he didn't want Naruto to tease him before the test. The following day, two fused chain links that aid in chakra control were being tampered with by Naruto. They were composed of metal that absorbed chakra. Only when the user inserted a very specific quantity of chakra would they separate. Even though it was such a basic concept, it worked incredibly well because you could perform it while moving and the amount of chakra would change slightly each time you were successful. In the middle of a clearing, he glanced up at his teammates, who were both leaning against the tree training poles. Naruto asked out loud, I wonder if this is a habit of sensei's? Today, their sensei was nearly 2 hours late once more. Hinata said, I hope not, and stood up to stretch. This was absurd, even though Hinata was a patient person. A whirl of leaves materialized before them as if at the same moment. Kakashi lied without trying to be credible, saying, Yo, sorry I'm late. A black cat walked across my path so I had to take the long way. The three of them started to perspire. It's definitely a habit, Hinata reflected sorrowfully. Kakashi started, now that we're all here, we can begin the test, as though someone else had run late. Kakashi held up 2 bells and said, Your objective is to take these bells from me by noon today. If you don't, you'll be thrown back into the academy and end up in the reserves. He then tucked the bells through his belt loop. Naruto looked curiously at Kakashi and deadpanned. There's only 2 bells, indicating that he was a familiar face. Kakashi gave him a smile. Very good, point for you. There are only 2 bells, so that means that only 2 of you can pass. The one who doesn't get a bell ends up in the academy, Kakashi said. That made Kiba stiffen. This was his opportunity. He would give Hinata one of those bells if he could get them, and Naruto would be sent to the academy. That way, he would no longer be able to stand in Hinata's way. Naruto's expression grew more perplexed. Why was Kakashi telling him that one of the genin teams would fail even though he was certain that they were made up of 3 genin and a Junin sensei? Would a genin who had previously failed the exam take the place of the 3rd member? Since there are no more questions, begin on 3. 1, 2, 3. Naruto stayed, still looking at Kakashi with a fierce expression, while 2 blurs fled into the forest. Kakashi looked amusedly in response to his younger brother's glare. He said, You were meant to go when I said go. Naruto gave a nod. He continued to look at Kakashi as he answered, I know, but I'm trying to figure out where I know you from. Your voice sounds familiar. Kakashi's gaze grew a little wider. He had only ever spoken to Naruto once, when he was 4 years old and experiencing a nightmare, and once after he had escaped from the Uchiha torture chamber. It took some time, but he had eventually consoled Naruto. The boy had actually only become calmer after he had left, but he couldn't possibly recall that, could he? Following more than a minute of staring, Kakashi said he would tell Naruto later. Then, both of them assumed taijutsu stances, and Kakashi took out his book. Kakashi was aware that he was unlikely to be able to read, but an opponent who was upset or frustrated was careless. With ferocious punches and kicks, the two clashed in midair. As they attacked each other, they were both just blurs. Naruto barely avoided the subsequent left hook after taking a round kick to the jaw. In response, Naruto launched a barrage of erratic punches and kicks that Kakashi believed would be difficult to predict even with his left eye visible. But none of the blows struck, and Kakashi even started blocking some of the blows with his book. Naruto quickly twisted his body to retaliate with an elbow to the face after blocking a knee to the gut with both forearms. After catching the blow with his hand, Kakashi put his book beneath Naruto's armpit before hurling him across the clearing with force and putting the book away right away. When Naruto finally faced the ground, a blue phantom hand shot out of his outstretched hand towards Kakashi after he performed a series of amazing mid-air acrobatics to keep facing his opponent as he flew across the clearing. Kakashi, who had been anticipating Naruto's use of this trick, barely avoided the phantom hand. After learning about Naruto's inherited Kekkei Genkai from the Hokage, he was only able to admire how effective the technique was. Kushina herself acknowledged that one of the main problems with her chakra chains was that they were unable to attach to anything. She couldn't, for instance, catch something that was being thrown at her in midair, but they could pierce or wrap themselves around objects. That was not a problem with Naruto's variant. Now that he had to concentrate entirely on the hands attempting to seize the bells, Kakashi blinked in surprise as the single phantom hand abruptly expanded to 2. Although he was aware that exposing Obito's Sharingan eye would undermine the exercise's purpose, he still intended to use it. Naruto used his chakra arms to pursue Kakashi. He could do much more than 2 arms, but since Kakashi was holding back, he felt he should too. Kakashi yelled, Earth Release, Mud Wall, and used the wall to take a brief respite from the unrelenting arms. Focusing on his chakra at the palm of one of its arms, Naruto grinned. It would be an understatement to say that Kakashi was impressed by Naruto's skill, so he inhaled deeply. He was equally adept at using Kushina's chains and his chakra arms. Then he heard someone drilling into the ground. Just before a chakra arm brandishing a Rasengan exploded through his earth wall and barely missed striking Kakashi in the stomach, he leapt back. After launching himself back into a handspring, Kakashi kept flipping until he hit the lake. Has he transformed the Rasengan into a long-range weapon? In what can only be described as awe, Kakashi thought. Only Naruto had been able to improve the Rasengan out of the 3 individuals who were aware of that jutsu. Kakashi wasn't sure whether he should be pleased with his younger brother or upset that he was using it against a fellow soldier. A barrage of senbon was hurled at Kakashi, 2 of which nailed him in the leg, interrupting his attempt to fly through hand signals for water release, water dragon jutsu. That leg instantly crashed through the water's surface, causing Kakashi's eyes to widen in surprise. It took him a moment to realize that his tenketsu were laced with chakra and that the senbon had struck them. Hinata joined him on the water's surface a second later. A calm and collected mask, prepared for battle, replaced Hinata's typically timid appearance. As he pushed his weight onto one leg, Kakashi laughed. Kakashi said, "You have incredible aim," as he pulled the senbon from his leg. "I'm guessing that one of the traditions you want to break is your clan being close-range fighters," he was thinking loudly. He had always found it strange that a clan of shinobi who could see for miles around them concentrated on close-quarters combat. Hinata prepared another volley and nodded. "With our Byakugan and chakra control, we could become some of the best," Hinata added as she launched the subsequent volley. "I also wish for my clan to become medics." Since he was unable to use his leg, Kakashi attempted to avoid the senbon by performing a series of acrobatics and moving toward the shore. But Naruto had joined forces with Hinata. On the water's surface, Naruto joined the 2 and applied pressure to Kakashi. One leg was useless on the water, so Kakashi was struggling to keep up. When Hinata had managed to sneak up on him with those senbon, Kakashi realized how much he had depended on Obito's eye to keep track of his enemies. Kakashi avoided and deflected Hinata's senbon and Naruto's blows, but Naruto eventually caught him off guard when he stumbled on the water and his useless leg attempted to support him. Although Kakashi managed to deflect Naruto's powerful left hook, he was immediately sent skyward by an upper kick to the jaw. Using the momentum of his kick, Naruto flipped in midair, and Kakashi reached out and almost grabbed one of the bells as he started to fly. However, Kakashi threw his useless foot in the boy's face and fell backward into the water when he realized Naruto was about to fail the test. Kakashi calmed himself and let himself drop into the water. These 2 were really pushing him, and he was beginning to think about not holding back. He dodged the chakra arms trained on him and swam to the bottom of the lake. Once he got to the bottom, he tunneled through the ground and out of the lake using an additional earth jutsu. A few hundred yards from the lake, he surfaced and spent some time testing his leg. It was all right, he thought, although he was still unable to channel chakra past his knee. Shunshin, enhanced kicks, and surface walking were among the techniques he mentally crossed off as being either useless or severely limited. A not.so. Subtle rustling in the bushes interrupted Kakashi's leg massage. Pretending not to hear it, he let out a sigh. As he watched his weakening sensei attempt to regain sensation in his leg, Kiba grinned up in the trees. Kiba had been up in the trees watching the battle between Kakashi, Sensei and Naruto, Teme, and it had just so happened that Kakashi had reappeared nearby. Naruto's strength had taken Kiba by surprise. He never imagined he would be able to push back a Junin, even though he knew Naruto had chosen to be the last to die. Thus, the question arose. Why was Naruto restraining himself to such an extent? He could have easily been at the top of the class, so why would he remain at the bottom? Did he want to play with Hinata on the same team? He had watched with envy as Hinata used her senbon to sink Sensei and Naruto used those strange chakra arms and that strange jutsu to push Kakashi, Sensei back to the lake. If I want to be on Hinata-chan's team, I really need to get one of the bells soon, Kiba thought anxiously, and Akamaru whined softly as though he could hear his master's thoughts. The fact that Kakashi had surfaced just a few yards from his location must have been a gift from Kami. Ga. Fake surprise. Kakashi looked up to see the impending attack coming his way. He waited until the last second to use the back of his hand to swat Kiba away in order to avoid the impending death drill. Before violently stopping, Kiba flew to the side and struck a tree, shattering it. With a bored tone, Kakashi said, "Oh? You're out of it already? Guess my team will be Hinata and Naruto. Probably for the best. Did you know that it's incredibly common for the female on a team to end up dating or marrying one of their teammates? I guess she'll end up with Naruto," as he took out his little orange book once more. In addition to trying to enrage Kiba, he was subtly hinting at the test's actual purpose. He couldn't pass them unless they all cooperated, even though Hinata and Naruto were working together flawlessly. Kiba stood up and snarled like a dog that had been kicked. He screamed angrily, "Oh yeah? How do you like this, man-beast clone?" Behind Kakashi, Akamaru abruptly changed into an exact replica of Kiba. "Gatsa, ga!" Kiba exclaimed as he started to spin. Kakashi knew that Akamaru was doing the same without having to turn around. After all, it was the same jutsu, but with a team approach. Kakashi leapt into the air to avoid a collision as they both bounded forward. Before soaring up a tree to attack Kakashi in midair, Kiba and Akamaru both passed each other without hurting each other. As he watched the two spinning wheels of death approach him from the front and the back, Kakashi blew a low whistle. Kiba's proficiency with several clan techniques impressed him. The majority of clan heirs were limited to using just one technique. But it was insufficient. Kakashi used his observation that Akamaru was somewhat quicker than his master to analyze the jutsu. Kakashi put a foot on Akamaru's side and pushed him into his master as Akamaru got closer. The jutsu was cancelled when the two collided in midair, and they both fell to earth. While still reading his small book, Kakashi landed gracefully and sighed when he noticed Kiba was having trouble getting back up. With a hint of annoyance, he said, "You don't really think you can win, do you?" Kiba might unintentionally fail the team if he continued to push himself because he would be dead weight. Shut up, Cyclops, Kiba screamed, getting to his feet. Reaching into his pocket, he removed a tiny pill tube. Before taking a pill himself, Kiba threw one of the soldier pills to Akamaru. As Kiba appeared even more savage than he already was and Akamaru turned a bloody red, Kakashi watched with mild interest. Kakashi closed his book with a sigh. "You're very stubborn," said Kakashi. Kiba shouted, "Gatsa, ga!" once more after hurling a few smoke bombs at Kakashi. While Kiba attacked nothing above him, Kakashi used his earth jutsu once more and vanished beneath the earth's surface. "My younger brother is a prodigy unlike any other. My Hyuga uses at least one long-ranged ability, breaking clan customs. Additionally, my Inuzuka is capable of using multiple clan techniques. If they pass, it appears that I got lucky with this team," Kakashi praised below ground. Kakashi moved beneath Kiba and yanked him down until only the boy's head was left before emerging again when he heard the commotion above stop. Kiba was screaming at him to dig him out, and he laughed at his expense. Seeing someone buried up to their necks was always amusing, regardless of how often he saw it. When a nearby log that he had kawarmied with was transformed into a pincushion by a volley of senbon, his laughter was short-lived. Even though he had forgotten to instruct them to approach him with the intention of killing, Kakashi found it a little unsettling that they were approaching him with enough force to do so. With his leg finally feeling better, Kakashi shunned away, wondering if the three would work together. Kakashi was aware that Naruto and Hinata could obtain the bells independently, but if they didn't cooperate, he wouldn't be able to pass them as a genin team. Angry that they had just missed Kakashi, Naruto and Hinata leapt into the clearing. Then they noticed Akamaru, who was frantically attempting to extricate his master and Kiba's head. Naruto collapsed to the ground, laughing, and Hinata hurried over to assist in his extraction. "Oh, that's so rich," exclaimed Naruto, who continued to chuckle at Kiba's expense. In return, Kiba gave him a bloody murder glare. He growled, "Shut it, Uzumaki." Kiba thanked Hinata and Akamaru for their efforts after they had completed excavating the Inuzuka, but he asserted that he could have escaped without their assistance. "Now that Kiba is out of his hole, we need to discuss something," Naruto said, concluding in a serious tone after he had finished rolling his eyes. Kiba's gaze grew strained. Kiba retorted, "Yeah? What would I need to talk to you about?" Because he didn't like Naruto's leadership. Naruto sighed in frustration. "Teamwork." Hinata picked it up right away. She calmed the nin.dog user by explaining, "Naruto and I think that Kakashi-sensei is lying about one of us failing no matter what. So we think we should work together." Kiba questioned, "What do you mean he's lying?" And Akamaru responded with a bark. Hinata-chan said, "We think he's lying. We're not sure though. I know for a fact that genin teams consist of 3 genin and a junin instructor." Naruto was interrupted by Kiba, who asked, "How do you know that?" Naruto stared at him drably. Naruto stated in a flat voice, "The academy. Since you're a clan heir, you should know that twice over." He detested being the last to die in situations like these since, in theory, Kiba and other people were smarter than he was. He was troubled by that. Kiba tried to come up with a reason for not knowing that, even though he was aware of it. All he had wanted was to get even with Naruto. "Shut up!" Kiba screamed when he was at a loss for words. With a simple roll of his eyes, Naruto gave Hinata a "Are you sure you want to team up with this guy?" expression. After pausing, Hinata nodded. As I was saying, 3 genin and a junin. We think that the bells are a lie and the real reason behind the test is teamwork. However, we could be wrong. He may be telling the truth and one of us will fail, even if we get the bells. And a genin from the other academy will replace the one that fails, Naruto clarified. Kiba appeared to consider this. Kiba posed the question in a demanding manner, "What if you're wrong? Who fails?" Before he allowed Naruto to send him back to the academy, he would pass away. Naruto gave a shrug. He responded with the full intention of having Kiba fail if they were mistaken. "We'll burn that bridge down when we cross it," he said. Although it wasn't personal, if Hinata wasn't on the same team as him, he couldn't defend her. Kiba glanced down at Akamaru, who quickly yipped his approval of the arrangement. Kiba also gave a nod of agreement. It usually was if Akamaru thought it was a good idea. The two decided to collaborate, and Hinata gave a small smile. "Good, now, I have a plan." A string of smoke bombs exploded around Kakashi, interrupting his reading. Putting up his favorite book and getting ready for Kiba's performance, Kakashi sighed. But something else took place. Kakashi was not hit by the volley of senbon that pierced through the dense smoke, but it had been close. In an attempt to escape the black smoke before Hinata struck him once more, Kakashi threw himself backwards. So they're collaborating? Excellent. As he dashed out of the smoke, Kakashi thought joyfully. Several of Naruto's chakra arms greeted Kakashi as he emerged from the black smoke. He avoided them, but it was only a diversion. Akamaru and Kiba had been attempting to pierce him while he was preoccupied. Naruto's chakra arms caught Kakashi after he evaded both spinning attacks. Kakashi grabbed the bells with his arms and was pinned down by Naruto. Hinata was grinning, pleased that her plan had succeeded, and Kiba and Akamaru both yelled and barked with delight. Naruto led his sensei up and jingled the bells he was holding. "It seems like we've won, Kakashi. Sensei," he said. Kakashi gave his head a back rub. Dropping his hand as he got to his feet, Kakashi said gravely, "Yes, it seems you have. Now, which one of you will fail?" In an instant, Hinata's smile vanished, and Kiba and Akamaru both stopped leaping with delight. Hinata said, "Why? You mean one of us still fails?" in a tiny, agitated voice. It had been her hope that they would all pass. Kakashi gave a solemn nod. He used this as an informal test to hold them accountable for beating him. He needed to see how well they worked together, but they all passed anyhow. Naturally, Naruto ripped the bells in two and threw one to Hinata. Hinata easily rang the bell, but she looked down at it with shame. She turned to look at a distraught Akamaru and Kiba, who were aware that such a thing might occur. As Hinata approached Kiba and offered the bell, Kakashi looked on with pride. "You deserve this more than I do. If it wasn't for your smoke bombs, then Kakashi Sensei would have seen Naruto's chakra arms," she claimed. She was aware that Inuzukas had extremely weak egos, but Naruto could have used his own smoke bombs and chakra arms to get the bells. Kiba gazed in disbelief at the bell, then at Hinata, and finally back at the bell. Aware that this was a big deal, he asked, "Are you sure, Hinata? Chan?" He accepted the bell while Hinata nodded and vigorously thanked her. Abruptly, Naruto tossed his bell to Hinata. Naruto put his hands in his pockets to indicate that he would not take the bell back. "And you need that bell more than I do. I can only imagine the hissy fit that Hiyashi will throw if his daughter doesn't pass," he said. Naruto refused to accept Hinata's attempt, even allowing the bell to fall from his chest to the floor. Then a tiny silver bell nearly struck his head, but it was caught by a tiny blue chakra hand that emerged from the side of his head. Naruto turned to face Kiba, his expression bewildered. Would he truly forfeit the opportunity to be with Hinata? The dirt was kicked up by Kiba. Kiba scowled and cursed his instincts in his mind as he said, "Don't look so shocked, ya, Teme. Inuzukas follow a pack ideal and sometimes a member of the pack has to make a sacrifice." At his genin, Kakashi smiled. "Congratulations, you all pass." Silence fell. "What?" Kiba yelled, and Hinata and Naruto appeared as shocked as he did. Kakashi laughed. "Yes, you all pass. You actually all passed when you all started to work together, but I wanted to see how far you were willing to go for your new teammates." He smiled in their eyes. "You all did excellent, and we have our first team meeting tomorrow morning." By this point, the shock had subsided, and Kiba was once again leaping with delight. Naruto smiled slyly at Hinata. He said, "Wanna go celebrate?" Naruto frowned as Kiba cut in. "Yeah, that's a great idea. Let's go get barbecue." Naruto replied, "You haven't been invited yet, Fido," with a sour tone, when someone interrupted his alone time with Hinata. Chan, he didn't like it. After being the two of them for so long, he was at ease with it being just the two of them, not because it was romantic. Kakashi said, now, play nice. However, celebrating does sound nice. As your sensei, it'll be my treat, before Kiba could reply to Naruto. After that, Naruto's voice totally changed, putting aside any discomfort in exchange for a complimentary meal. Naruto exclaimed, well, what are we waiting for? Let's go eat. While Hinata believed their sensei had just made a grave error regarding his wallet.
That's it for today. I hope you guys enjoyed this great story. See you in the next one.